Those who have spent time behind bars know that robbery is the fastest way to make money, especially when targeting women. The logic was simple. They were supposedly slow to react and lacked the wit to resist, always handing over their cash without a second thought. And so, he made his move, only to spend a year behind a prison sewing machine because, as fate would have it, he had robbed a policewoman. A year later, he was released with the intention of becoming a normal citizen, but then he saw the measly $5 left in his pocket. He figured he might as well try one more heist. At worst, he'd return to a place with free food and water. However, he had no idea. During the year he was away, the world had changed completely, with all sorts of demons and monsters descending into reality. After buying a broken peachwood sword on the street, he set out. It was late, and though he wandered for hours, he couldn't find a single soul. Not even a ghost was in sight. Just as he began to lament how difficult even robbery had become these days, he finally spotted a figure on the road ahead. The silhouette just stood there, faintly surrounded by a swirling, dark mist. It was too dark for him to notice the details, and thinking only of his next meal, he charged forward with his broken sword. He grabbed the female ghost by the neck with one hand and pressed the broken wood against her throat, shouting for her not to move. He demanded her money, leaving a group of nearby exorcists, who had been tracking the spirit, completely stunned. The ghost was equally confused. It was a bizarre scene, to say the least. With a fierce expression, he continued his threats, demanding she hand over every cent. He threatened to run her through, while the ghost, her face deathly pale, showed a hint of pure bewilderment in her terrifying eyes. It took a long moment for her to realize she was being mugged, just as the hidden exorcists finally processed what they were seeing. Their leader whispered in disbelief, wondering what kind of absolute madman comes out at night to rob a vengeful spirit. A female exorcist behind him felt a wave of shame, noting that despite their training, they were all still hesitating. While they were too afraid to make a move, this man had simply walked up and taken charge of the situation alone. They assumed he must be a top-tier master, especially since that ghost carried a bounty of $10,000. It seemed they would miss out on the reward again, all because of their own cowardice compared to this man's sheer audacity. Meanwhile, the female ghost found herself at a complete loss, wondering why this man would dare to show his face in the middle of the night. The fact that he held her so fearlessly suggested he wasn't just unafraid of spirits, he seemed quite confident he could handle her. As she pondered this, she felt a sharp, burning discomfort where the broken peachwood sword was pressed against her neck. She realized that if he actually drove that blade in, she wouldn't just be injured, she might be completely dissipated. After a quick analysis of the situation, the ghost decided to surrender, pleading with him not to hurt her and promising him money. There was a distinct chill in her voice, but he was so focused on the payday that he didn't give it a second thought. He even felt a smug sense of pride, assuming she was just a timid woman who was literally shivering with fear. It seemed he truly had a natural talent for this line of work, as the ghost began fumbling around her clothes for something to give him. She pulled out a handful of paper and handed it back with a pale hand, but when he saw it, his face immediately twisted in anger. He demanded to know why she was giving him spirit money, while the ghost stood there utterly bewildered, explaining it was all she had. She couldn't fathom why a living person would want to rob her of funeral offerings, leaving him just as confused as she was. He scoffed, asking if she actually thought she was a ghost, which made her pause. What did he mean by thought? A realization dawned on her, and her tone turned deathly cold as she asked if he truly didn't know what she was. Suddenly, a wave of ghostly energy erupted from her, sending a chill through the air that made him shiver and swallow hard. He began to wonder if he could really be this unlucky, but he gathered his courage and challenged her to prove her identity. He told her he wouldn't just take her word for it, and with a chilling promise to show him, the ghost prepared her demonstration. We hear a sickening series of cracks as her hair begins to shift, even though her neck and body remain perfectly still. Her head spun around with terrifying smoothness to face him directly, a moment where he realized, perhaps, that crime was a mistake. Still in denial, he told her he'd only believe it if she took her head off, so she smiled and reached up with her pale hands. She lifted her head right off her shoulders and placed it on her backside, where she proceeded to make a horrifying face at him. She even went so far as to pop out her own eyeballs and place them in her palms, a sight so grotesque he finally begged her to stop, admitting he was convinced. To be honest, he had been convinced the moment her head spun around, but the ghost wasn't interested in apologies. She simply told him it was time to die. She opened her mouth wide, ready to tear into him, but just as her fangs were about to sink in, he shouted for her to wait. He claimed he had something special to show her, which made the ghost pause in confusion as he finally released his grip on her neck. As he slowly reached for his zipper, the ghost watched with wide eyes, perhaps expecting something quite different, but the reality was far less romantic. A sudden stream of liquid hit her, and the ghost let out a piercing scream of agony, as if her face had been splashed with pure acid. Her head went flying back from the sheer shock of the pain, while he laughed, grateful that he knew virgin urine was effective against spirits. He took a certain pride in his status as a virgin in that moment, but as the ghost's head tried to fly back for revenge, he quickly raised his broken peachwood sword. He pressed the blade against her headless neck, warning her that while the urine might not kill her, this sword certainly would if she didn't behave. The ghostly head stopped its charge instantly, glaring at him with pure hatred as she demanded to know what he actually wanted from her. He explained that while he started the night looking for a payday, he was now just trying to stay alive, though she promised not to hurt him if he let her go. He scoffed at the idea, reminding her that he wasn't a child and had even done time in prison. He knew she'd kill him the second he let go. The ghost fell silent because, to be perfectly honest, he was absolutely right, but being outsmarted by a mortal was a bitter pill for a spirit to swallow. With her head still floating in the air, she irritably asked what his plan was, and he realized that holding a ghost body hostage indefinitely wasn't exactly sustainable. And so he pulled out his phone and did the only logical thing. He called the police to report that he had kidnapped a female ghost. He admitted to the operator that the atmosphere was getting a bit awkward and tense, and he politely asked if they could send someone over to help. The ghost was stunned that he would actually call the authorities, especially since this world has specialized departments for dealing with the supernatural. We see that these experts are divided into two groups, the unofficial ones, like Taoist priests and exorcists, and the official government branches. The official side consists of police departments that recruit practitioners to handle urban monsters, and sure enough, they dispatched a unit immediately. Soon, the officers arrived on the scene, where the ghost's head was still hovering apart from her body, staring at him with utter disbelief. She never imagined he would actually call the police. For a ghost like her, the arrival of Officer Lin meant only one thing, a prison cell. Because she frequently terrified people, she had violated the strict regulations set by Officer Lin for supernatural entities living in the mortal realm. Violating these rules meant immediate arrest and punishment, but he simply wanted to hand her over so he could finally be out of danger. The ghost, feeling quite helpless, asked who was truly in danger here, considering he was the one currently kidnapping her body. She pointed out the absurdity of him claiming to be unsafe while pressing a peachwood sword against her neck and calling the authorities. He knew that if he let go now, she would kill him instantly, despite her earnest promises that she wouldn't cause him any harm. He simply curled his lip and continued to wait for Officer Lin, refusing to fall for her ghostly charms or empty guarantees. He didn't dare loosen his grip on the peachwood sword for a second, keeping it pressed against her headless neck regardless of what her floating head said. He simply stopped listening, leaving the ghost on the verge of a breakdown. She was used to being the villain, not the victim of a kidnapping. Just as she reached the depths of despair, a police car pulled up and several officers, led by Officer Lin, stepped out to survey the scene. They were visibly bewildered, clearly having never encountered a situation quite like this in all their years on the force. The captain approached with a baton engraved with runes and blessed for spiritual combat, looking back and forth between the floating head and the pinned body. When he asked what was going on, the ghost immediately huffed that she was being kidnapped, but he was quick to refute her claim. He argued that she was the one out scaring people at night and that he was merely performing a public service by subduing her. The ghost rolled her eyes in fury, reminding him that he had explicitly mentioned a robbery and asked her for money earlier. He scoffed at the idea, asking why he would rob a ghost. What would he do with spirit money? Spend it in the underworld? He flatly denied being a kidnapper, leaving the ghost speechless and unable to do anything but glare at him with pure, concentrated rage. The officers naturally found his story more believable, as the idea of someone actually trying to rob a ghost seemed utterly impossible. A young, short-haired female officer stepped forward, scolding the ghost for trying to twist the truth, as only a fool would try to rob a spirit. He looked at the female officer and noted that while one might talk about such things, actually robbing a ghost was a different matter entirely. Officer Lin looked at the ghost's floating head and ordered her to reattach it to her body and follow them, warning her not to resist. The ghost, clearly unwilling to submit, snapped back with a challenge, asking if they really thought they had the guts to try and take her. Our protagonist, Zhou Mei, pressed the peachwood sword harder against her neck, telling her to do as the officer said, or he would drive the blade home. Faced with his cold resolve, the ghost finally lost her nerve. With a hateful glare, her head reluctantly flew back and reattached to her shoulders. At that moment, the lead officer signaled for his team to move in, and they secured the ghost with a pair of specially made supernatural handcuffs. Finally, the heavy weight in Zhou Mei's chest lifted as he watched the officers lead the ghost away and lock her securely inside the police van. The young female officer then approached him, handing over an envelope while thanking him for his contribution to the city's safety. He was stunned to find a thick stack of red bills inside, 10,000 yuan, a reward for his unexpected bravery. This sudden stroke of luck was entirely unexpected. It seemed that kidnapping a ghost didn't lead to prison, but to a payday instead. His eyes lit up with a newfound ambition as he felt the cash in his pocket, his heart racing with an excitement he couldn't quite contain. He realized then that if ghosts were the key to getting rich, he was willing to risk everything. And so, a new path began for our handsome hero. He had found a way to make money that was technically legal, and his first thought, naturally, was to find a decent meal to celebrate. However, at this late hour, most shops were closed, and he was soon interrupted by the group of exorcists who had been watching from the shadows. Their leader approached him in awe, asking how on earth he had managed to take down a ghost single-handedly with just a simple wooden sword. Zhou looked them over and asked who they were, to which they introduced themselves as a team of trainee exorcists. They called themselves the Night Squad, a group dedicated to hunting malevolent spirits in exchange for bounties and rewards. Their leader, Leon, admitted they hadn't stepped in because they were nowhere near as fierce or capable as Zhou appeared to be. He confessed it was their first time facing a real ghost, and Zhou casually remarked that it happened to be his first time as well. This revelation left the group even more shocked, and the female exorcist couldn't help but exclaim how incredibly brave he was for a beginner. Zhou simply tucked his hands into his pockets and acted cool, remarking that it was really nothing, just a ghost, after all. Leon spoke up quickly, asking if our hero could share some of his experience, as they clearly needed to learn how to face a ghost properly. Zhou replied that first, one must not be afraid. After all, every ghost was once a person, and every person eventually becomes a ghost. He added that since they were doing this for money, fear was a luxury they couldn't afford, because being poor is far more terrifying than any spirit. Leon was deeply moved by this logic and immediately offered Zhou the position of leader within their night squad. Zhou thought about it for exactly 1 second before refusing. Deep down, he had no intention of splitting his hard-earned rewards with anyone. Meanwhile, as the police van carrying the female ghost reached an intersection, a strange sight appeared, a red bridal sedan carried by 4 small spirits. The sedan charged from the side and collided with the van. Remarkably, the sedan remained unscathed while the police vehicle was flipped completely over. Inside the sedan, a beautiful female ghost let out a chilling laugh, sitting beside a male officer who had been knocked unconscious. She intended to take him away to be her groom, and by the time the other officers crawled out of the wreckage, the sedan had vanished into thin air. The ghost they had just captured took the chance to escape as well, leaving the female officer to shout into her radio about the supernatural kidnapping. She urgently requested backup at the Chunfeng intersection, reporting that an officer had been taken and their prisoner had fled. Meanwhile, we returned to Zhou. He had planned to say his goodbyes, but then he realized that if he was going to hunt ghosts for a living, he needed to know more. He asked the group which weapons were most effective against spirits, a question that seemed a bit basic for someone of his supposed caliber. When they looked surprised, he quickly claimed he was just testing their knowledge, and they eagerly explained that peachwood swords were the standard. They noted that century-old peachwood is best, especially if it has been struck by lightning, but that, as it turns out, is just the beginning. They listed other tools of the trade: exorcism talismans, demon-slaying charms, warding staves, red strings, and the classic bagua mirrors. As the exorcists competed to answer, Zhou nodded along, secretly memorizing every detail while praising their impressive professional knowledge. He told them their only real weakness was a lack of courage, a compliment that made the young trainees beam with pride. The female exorcist then made a bold request. She asked if he could give them a live demonstration or guide them through their next encounter. Zhou panicked internally, knowing he had no real skills and hadn't even bought proper gear yet, a rather awkward position for a supposed master. Not far away, a familiar female ghost was rapidly approaching. When she saw Zhou, she froze in shock, and he was equally surprised to see her again. He quickly recovered, smiling as he told the ghost that this must be fate, leaving the spirit utterly confused about how they could possibly meet twice. After escaping the police van, she certainly hadn't expected to run into him, mockingly noting how unlucky he was to cross her path once more. She was still fuming, remembering how he had kidnapped her and used his own urine to wound her. To be honest, she had every right to be angry. Zhou simply let out a cold laugh, remarking that he hadn't expected to see her either, but he was glad she was back to provide him with more value. He told her it was yet to be decided who was truly unlucky as he pulled out his broken peachwood sword, a move that left the ghost completely baffled. She wondered if his previous actions were just a mistake because he didn't realize she was a ghost, but this time, things felt very different. Now that he clearly knew she was a spirit, he was being even more aggressive. She began to suspect that his earlier confusion had all been an act. The truth is, the need for money can be far more driving than the fear of ghosts, especially when kidnapping one leads to a massive payday. As he gripped the broken sword, he didn't see a terrifying spirit. He saw a walking 10,000 yuan reward. And who could blame him, really? The young interns watched nervously from the sidelines, with Leon sighing in admiration at the sheer, overwhelming aura Zhou was projecting. The female exorcist nodded in agreement, thinking he looked incredibly cool and noting that he didn't show even a hint of weakness before the ghost. They had become his biggest fans, completely unaware that their idol possessed absolutely no magical skills or formal spiritual training whatsoever. All he had was the raw, intimidating energy of a bandit, and facing such a man, even the female ghost began to feel a bit of hesitation. Zhou reminded her that he wasn't afraid of her before, and certainly wasn't now, especially since she was still wearing those police handcuffs. The ghost panicked as she looked down, realizing she was still bound by the specialized spiritual restraints that suppressed her powers. With her hands locked, she knew it would be difficult to fight back. Meanwhile, Zhou let out a wicked grin and began to slowly close the distance. Looking at him, she felt a strange sense of dread. They say a man fears a ghost a little, but a ghost fears a fierce man far more. Once a human truly loses their fear and turns aggressive, there isn't much room left for a ghost to maneuver, as she nervously tried to back away. From a distance, the female exorcist watched in total awe, her respect for Zhou Mei reaching a level of absolute, unquestioning devotion. As Lian watched, Zhou Mei let out a dark, sinister laugh, looking at the female ghost with a terrifying expression while telling her to go ahead and scream. He told her that her screams only made him more excited, and seeing this madness, the ghost turned to flee, but Zhou Mei lunged forward instantly. He thrust his peachwood sword toward her back, forcing her to dodge frantically. He stayed so close that every attempt to escape met a new attack. He wasn't giving her an inch, and finally, the ghost snapped, lashing out with her lengthening tongue while Zhou Mei swung his sword to intercept it. The ghost pulled her tongue back in a panic, realizing that her supernatural tricks weren't working against this man's sheer aggression. He mocked her, noting that she couldn't kill him even before she was handcuffed, and when she tried to drift away again, he simply snorted in derision. There was no way he was letting 10,000 yuan float away, so he immediately gave chase, and while the ghost could float, she wasn't exactly fast. To be honest, her speed was severely limited by those specialized handcuffs, which suppressed most of the spiritual abilities she would normally use to escape. Zhou Mei accelerated several times, nearly catching her, while the other exorcists followed behind like spectators at a sporting event. As he ran, he kept up a creepy, rhythmic laughter, telling her she couldn't hide and that he was closing the gap with every step. He taunted her, saying he was close enough to strike her with his sword and urging her to run harder, claiming things were finally getting interesting. These words weighed heavily on the ghost. She had already lost the battle of wills, and now this terrifying man was hunting her like a predator. Between the physical chase and the psychological warfare, the poor spirit was reaching her breaking point. It was all becoming a bit much for her. Seizing his moment, Zhou Mei lunged forward with a burst of speed, tackling the ghost from behind and sending them both tumbling to the ground. After rolling across the dirt, he pinned her down, sitting firmly on her midsection while holding her chest to keep her from vanishing. With practiced ease, he pressed the jagged edge of his broken peachwood sword against her throat just as the other exorcists finally caught up. They arrived to see Zhou Mei in a dominant, almost kingly pose atop the captured spirit, though they lamented missing the actual struggle. Lian beat his chest in frustration for being too slow, while the female exorcist sighed, certain that the fight must have been spectacular. Meanwhile, the ghost had completely broken down and was sobbing uncontrollably, wailing about how terrifying this human was and questioning his sanity. She cried out that she just wanted to go back to her grave. Had she known she'd encounter such a fierce man, she never would have left home. She clearly hadn't checked her horoscope before leaving home, but Zhou Mei was thrilled. Another 10,000 yuan was his, and it felt like the easiest money he'd ever made. His casual attitude made Li En and the other exorcists turn red with embarrassment. After all, comparing oneself to others can be quite frustrating when they hadn't caught a single ghost. And yet, here was this man, catching the exact same ghost twice in a single night, leaving them feeling utterly ashamed of their own lack of results. If they knew he didn't even possess formal cultivation, they might have been ashamed enough to jump into a river. Meanwhile, the female ghost seemed to have a sudden realization. With lightning speed, she snatched the phone right out of Zhou Mei's pocket and dialed a number before anyone could react. The call connected almost instantly. She screamed into the phone, asking for the police and identifying herself as the ghost who had just escaped, only to be recaptured by this terrifying pervert. She begged them to hurry because he was too scary, leaving Zhou Mei completely stunned by this bizarre turn of events. The ghost was actually reporting herself to the authorities. He had intended to call them himself, but now the ghost had done the work for him. Nearby, Lian and the other interns watched in absolute awe. They were ready to prostrate themselves in admiration, having never seen a human drive a spirit so close to the edge that she sought police protection. It was certainly an eye-opening night for everyone involved, and they all nodded in agreement that they were witnessing something truly unprecedented. Before long, the same officers from the Spirit Bureau arrived in their patrol car, with the lead female officer being the first to step out. When she saw it was Zhou Mei pinning the ghost to the ground, her eyes lit up, noting that the spirit apparently couldn't escape his grasp after all. Zhou Mei looked at the officer and smiled, explaining that since he found her wandering again, he couldn't simply let her continue her wicked ways. He claimed he had acted decisively to suppress her for the sake of the public, a sentiment the officer found quite noble as the other police approached. As the officers moved in to secure the ghost, she seemed to be suffering a mental breakdown, staring at them with desperate, wide eyes. She begged them to take her away immediately, prompting the officer to ask why she was in such a hurry to go to jail when she had just escaped. The ghost simply roared at them to stop talking and just take her, while Zhou Mei, still thinking of his reward, decided to ask a pointed question. He asked how they had let her escape in the first place, mentioning that he had to chase her for over a mile and engage in a fierce struggle to catch her. The point of his story, of course, was to emphasize how much effort he had put in, which usually meant he expected to be paid again. The female officer didn't seem to catch his drift, however, and as they prepared to transport the ghost back, they encountered the strange, red sedan incident. The female ghost in the red bridal sedan had abducted one of our spirit officers, and by the time we caught up, the male officer was in terrible shape. He had most of his vital energy drained away, a blow so severe it would take him nearly a decade to recover. Meanwhile, this female ghost we see here took advantage of the chaos during that red sedan incident to make her escape. We honestly thought she was gone for good. We never imagined you would catch her again. You really are incredible. As she spoke, the female officer glanced down at the captive spirit. The way the ghost looked at Zhou Mei now wasn't just fear. She was staring at him as if he were a literal monster from her worst nightmares. Since every capture counts toward a reward, and you've caught her a second time, we really should give you another 10,000 yuan bonus. Zhou Mei played it cool, claiming the money didn't matter, but the officer insisted on the reward and handed him another 10,000 yuan. He accepted the cash with a show of reluctance, and not wanting to waste more time, he told the officer he wouldn't delay them any further. He urged them to take the ghost back and keep her under strict watch, so she grabbed a set of spirit shackles to secure the prisoner. Zhou Mei took the chance to whisper to the ghost, telling her to find him again if she ever escaped. The ghost's face went completely dark. She snapped back that she would never escape again and told him to give up on that idea, as she planned to stay in prison for life. As the patrol car drove away, Zhou Mei chuckled to himself. He had managed to squeeze 20,000 yuan out of a single ghost in one night. This business was proving to be quite lucrative. Lian ran over, calling him a master and asking about his incredible methods. He told them he had already demonstrated the secret. The essence is simply to have no fear when dealing with them. The interns claimed they finally understood his philosophy and were ready to study it, so Zhou Mei decided to head home since it was late. He turned to leave, convinced that even without formal spells, he could make a fortune in this industry as long as his equipment was right. However, just as he reached the intersection, a red bridal sedan, carried by 4 malevolent spirits, suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It charged straight into him from the side, and in the blink of an eye, Zhou Mei vanished, reappearing inside the sedan. This sight terrified the nearby exorcists. Lian turned pale, realizing this was the infamous red sedan and the bridal ghost. That was a high-level evil spirit. The female exorcist shouted for someone to call the police, as their master had just been snatched away. Her lips trembled with fear as she whispered that it was all over, for the bridal ghost was truly terrifying. Inside the red sedan, Zhou Mei looked around before turning to the female ghost sitting beside him in her wedding veil. He asked if she was into cosplay, but the ghost only let out an eerie laugh, inviting him to their wedding night. His eyes suddenly lit up with excitement. He couldn't believe his luck, wondering if she was actually being serious. The bridal ghost was momentarily stunned, as this wasn't her first time kidnapping men to drain their vital essence. Usually, they would scream, beg for mercy, or simply faint, but this man was proving to be quite different. She found herself feeling genuinely bewildered by his reaction, unsure of what to make of him. For the first time, she didn't know how to proceed, while Zhou Mei wasn't overthinking the situation at all. He was simply celebrating his incredible luck, having already earned a bonus for catching that other ghost earlier. After squeezing one ghost for cash twice, he now had another ghost seeking him out for a wedding night. He figured he could enjoy the evening and then call the police to collect another 10,000 yuan reward. To get paid for such an encounter seemed like a massive win, so he eagerly told her he would lift the veil. Without waiting for her to react, he grabbed the red silk, and the moment he pulled it back, he was stunned. An exquisitely beautiful face was revealed to him. To be honest, she was far more stunning than he expected. With her perfect features and striking red lips, she looked like the ideal woman, if you ignore the ghost part. The only flaw was her deathly pale complexion, which most people would find horrifying and eerie. However, to Zhou Mei, that paleness only added to her beauty, much to the ghost's utter surprise. She hadn't expected him to be so impatient, and she demanded to know exactly what he thought he was doing. He reminded her that she was the one who suggested the wedding night, asking if she was planning to back out. She noted his incredible courage, wondering what kind of person would willingly want to sleep with a ghost. She suspected he might be a powerful cultivator. After all, she couldn't imagine anyone else acting this way. Who else could remain so calm before a malevolent spirit, even trying to play along just to take advantage of her? Zhou Mei, meanwhile, was only thinking of the reward money he'd get after the encounter, asking her what her deal was. He pointed out they had a deal about the wedding night, accusing her of stalling and breaking her word. She countered that she wasn't breaking her word, but rather that no man had ever dared to lift her veil before. She added that no man had ever dared to follow through, to which he simply laughed, saying she just hadn't met him yet. Now that the veil was off, he was ready for the wedding night, teasingly asking if she was getting cold feet. She snapped back that the wedding night was merely a trap to harm people, triggered the moment the veil was lifted. She explained her intent was to drain his essence, admitting she'd do it even if the veil stayed on. When he questioned her logic, she defensively claimed that everyone has their own professional process and routine. He argued that since the wedding night was part of her routine, she had no right to stop him from proceeding. She insisted that his desire to take advantage of her was an entirely different matter from her ghostly duties. But Zhou Mei was focused on her professionalism, or lack thereof, questioning her commitment to her own ritual. He He demanded that, as the victim, he should be allowed to experience the full process, but she only wanted his essence. The bridal ghost was becoming quite unreasonable, while Zhou stood his ground regarding his experience. He told her that if she wasn't going to deliver on her promises, she shouldn't have brought them up in the first place. He concluded she was an amateur ghost, but she didn't care, reminding him he was trapped in her sedan chair. She was determined to take what she wanted, but Zhou wasn't about to let her get away with such poor service. He laid down the law. If he didn't get the benefits he was promised, she wasn't getting a single drop of his essence. The ghost was furious at his audacity, but he simply sneered, reminding her that he was the one in control of his own life force. He threatened that if she tried to force the essence from him, he'd simply end his own life and haunt her as a ghost forever. The bridal ghost recoiled in shock, stunned by his ruthlessness, but Zhou only glared back with fierce determination. Seeing that he wasn't joking, the ghost found herself at a complete loss. She had never met a human this arrogant. She realized that if he was this bold as a man, he would be an absolute nightmare to deal with as a spirit. Faced with a man who feared neither ghosts nor death, she finally gave in, admitting she respected his sheer audacity. She decided to let the matter drop, introducing herself as a bridal wraith from the East Mountain burial grounds near Haiqing. He replied that his name was Chun Zai, an inmate from Haiqing's first prison, specifically cell block 3, prisoner 9527. She promised to avoid him in the future and told him to leave, but Zai wasn't about to go that easily. The ghost panicked as he insisted that since she brought him here, she had to finish the ritual in the wedding night. In all her years of haunting, she had never encountered someone so difficult to deal with while trying to claim a soul. The fact that he used suicide as a threat was bad enough, but his extreme personality meant he'd likely become a high-rank demon instantly. That would make him even more impossible to handle, so the bridal ghost actually began to feel intimidated by her victim. She tried to call the whole thing off, offering to let him keep his essence, but Zai refused to let her break the routine. At this point, the ghost felt her entire worldview crumbling as she desperately asked him what he actually wanted from her. He made it clear they had to follow her professional process to the letter, wedding night and all, despite her tearful pleas. She begged him to just leave, but he lectured her on the importance of a ghost maintaining their professional integrity. He argued that even when harming people, one must keep their word before sprawling out in the sedan chair and waiting. He told her the schedule was tight and they needed to hurry, prompting the ghost to apologize profusely for her mistake. She begged for mercy like a confused younger sister, but his stance was firm. He was going to take full advantage of the situation. The ghost was trapped in a paradox of her own making. If she tried to force the essence now, she knew she'd regret it. She was terrified that he'd end his life and return as a vengeful spirit to haunt her, yet she couldn't actually go through with the wedding night. As dawn approached, she pleaded to return to the burial grounds, calling the night a mistake, but Zai simply shook his head in refusal. He insisted on a proper resolution, threatening that even if she fled, he would dig up her remains and bring them home with him. He wouldn't stop until he was satisfied, and the bridal wraith, suppressing her fury, finally gritted her teeth and agreed to his terms. Zai smiled as she finally relented, claiming he wasn't taking advantage of her, but rather teaching her a lesson in ghostly ethics. He lectured her on the importance of integrity, even for a spirit, while she sarcastically thanked him for the unwanted life lesson. A moment later, the bridal wraith looked at him with a hint of her former superiority and demanded some of his yang energy. Zai was confused, thinking he'd already given enough, but since yang energy was different from essence, he agreed to a tiny amount. The ghost nodded, and we see a faint white mist pass from Zai's mouth into hers as the ritual finally reached its conclusion. After only a few seconds, he cut her off, reminding her that he'd promised a taste, not a full feast, despite the meager amount. Even that small loss made him feel a bit drowsy, while the ghost stood there stunned, forced to swallow her pride and her hunger. Her only goal now was to rid herself of this terrifying man, but Zai, still lounging in the sedan chair, had other plans. He showed no sign of leaving, instead looking at her curiously and asking why she was so obsessed with draining men specifically. Her expression darkened as she explained her desire for power, admitting that her focus on men stemmed from a deep-seated hatred. Sensing a tragic backstory, Zai encouraged her to share it, noting that he always enjoyed a good ghost story, especially from the source. Though clearly annoyed, she began her tale, revealing she was once a wealthy young lady whose wedding day turned into a nightmare. Before she even reached her new home, the fiancé she had never met ran off with another woman, making her a public laughingstock. Consumed by shame and rage, she set her own wedding sedan on fire, perishing in the flames to become the wraith we see now. Zai frowned, calling her reaction extreme and suggesting she should have just found another man, though he realized times were different then. The bridal wraith gave him a look of utter disbelief, pointedly reminding him that he had just threatened to kill himself over a minor disagreement. Zai had the audacity to call her extreme, but he simply gave a dark smile and told her to stop the sedan chair, making her feel a sudden sense of relief. She thought he was finally leaving, so with a wave of her hand, the four small spirits lowered the chair to the ground, allowing Zai to take a closer look. He realized these 4 spirits were actually paper dolls, not real ghosts, and noted that she had clearly drained the yang energy of many people. She admitted to draining dozens lately, but when Zai pointed out that her actions were illegal, the bridal wraith was stunned, wondering what that had to do with anything. Then, we see Zai slowly pull out his phone and dial a number, calmly reporting a ghost sighting to the police before hanging up. The bridal wraith was furious, accusing him of turning on her the moment things were over, but Zai just frowned at her choice of words. He insisted he was the victim here, arguing that since she had taken his energy, it was only natural for him to report the crime. He asked her if it would be fair for a criminal to humiliate a woman and steal her money, then forbid her from calling the police afterward. The ghost was shaken, realizing his logic was somehow flawless. She couldn't find a single way to argue that she wasn't the one in the wrong. She called him a scoundrel and a piece of trash, completely breaking down because she couldn't win the argument and didn't dare attack him. In that moment, she discovered that even a ghost can feel utterly helpless, just as several police cars arrived to surround the sedan chair. The officers could hear the bridal wraith screaming insults from inside the chair, calling Zai a beast, a degenerate, and a monster. A female spirit officer ran over to Zai, asking what had happened and why the ghost seemed to hate him so much. Zai felt his reputation was at stake. After all, being kidnapped on his very first day as a ghost hunter was quite embarrassing. He explained that the ghost had promised a wedding ritual and energy draining, but since he followed through, calling the police was perfectly reasonable. The officer was baffled that a ghost who had drained so many people felt like the victim, while the wraith glared at Zai, vowing to remember his name. She told him she wouldn't waste her breath while outnumbered, but mocked the idea that these spirit police could actually hold her. With a sudden cry, the bridal wraith burst through the roof of the sedan chair, just as a dozen officers raised their specialized spirit guns. They fired instantly, launching specially treated nets that expanded in midair and trapped the ghost before she could escape. The wraith screamed as white smoke rose from where the net touched her, but then her ghostly energy surged as she tried to break free by force. With several loud snaps, the heavy nets trapping her instantly shattered into pieces as she mocked the officers for thinking they could actually hold her. We see that the police were surprisingly ineffective, and the female officer quickly rushed to Zai's side to ask if he was all right. Zai noted that they hadn't been very helpful, but she explained that the wraith was powerful and their department's experts hadn't arrived yet. She warned Zai to be careful, as the ghost factions at Dongshan Port were quite formidable and the bridal wraith clearly held a grudge. She was certain the ghost would return with reinforcements to deal with him, but Zai simply nodded, acknowledging the threat without much concern. His lack of fear deeply impressed the officer, who told Zai that his fearless spirit was truly something invincible. She introduced herself as Jinya, which prompted Zai to share his own name, while the police captain approached with a grin, calling himself Wia. After saying his goodbyes to the spirit police, Zai returned home alone, and at dawn the next day, he headed back to the same shop from before. He was ready to buy more equipment, but the short-haired girl took one look at him and bluntly stated they were out of $5 items. She told him to look elsewhere, leaving Zai quite annoyed as he asked if she had any secret manuals for practicing Taoist arts. She offered a basic manual for $5,000, and to her surprise, Zai agreed immediately and pulled out the cash. Her attitude performed a complete U-turn the moment she saw the money, and she quickly placed the basic Taoist manual into his hands. With a winning smile, she asked if he needed anything else, but Zai decided to head home first to study his new purchase. He returned to his rented room, where the manual explained that cultivation involves drawing the world's energy into the human body. Once this energy forms true qi, one can use Taoist arts, spells, or Buddhist laws. Zai finished reading the entire book in just half a day. He began his practice that afternoon, and by nightfall, he snapped his eyes open as a clear light flashed within his gaze. He had already mastered the art of gathering energy, wondering if he might actually be a once-in-a-century cultivation genius. He could feel a significant amount of true qi gathering in his lower dantian, a sensation that felt incredibly comfortable and natural. Now that he had officially entered the world of cultivation, he returned to the shop to ask for more advanced manuals. When he mentioned he had already finished and mastered the first book, the short-haired girl was left completely speechless. She bit her tongue, deciding not to voice her skepticism, and simply went back inside to fetch another, more advanced book. Zai agreed to the $13,000 price tag, though he secretly worried he was overpaying, and they quickly completed the exchange. We returned to his rented room, where he studied the manual until the middle of the night before taking a deep, steadying breath. He learned several rune drawings, spell applications, and hand seals, feeling that he was finally becoming a truly skilled professional. Since it was already midnight, he figured he might as well find a ghost to deal with and earn some extra prize money. He decided to craft his own magical tool first, but after searching the room, all he found was a rusty watermelon knife. Following the instructions, he focused his true qi into his fingertips and began carving runes onto both sides of the rusted blade. As the energy touched the metal, glowing inscriptions slowly began to emerge, forming a complete divine weapon talisman after just a few moments. Once the carving was finished, he bit his finger and pressed 2 drops of blood onto the runes while reciting an ancient command. He called upon the heavens to awaken the hidden power within the blade, ending the incantation with a sharp, authoritative decree. The runes on the watermelon knife instantly flashed with a brilliant light, leaving Zai drenched in sweat from the sheer effort. He hadn't expected crafting a magical tool to be so exhausting, but he gripped his new weapon and headed out into the night. After all, if he didn't find a ghost to kidnap now, he could hardly call himself a professional in this new trade. The streets were as deserted as ever, but after walking for 2 blocks, he finally spotted 3 ghosts drifting ahead of him. One had a long tongue, another a knife in his chest, and the third a bullet hole in his head. None of them looked particularly friendly. Just as he was preparing to launch a sneak attack from behind, he overheard the long-tongued ghost asking his companions if they'd heard the news. Apparently, a notorious bandit had appeared in Haicheng who specialized in kidnapping ghosts for bounty money. The ghost warned that this man was incredibly fierce and that everyone in the local spirit circles was terrified of being caught. Zai frowned at this, stepping out to block their path with his knife drawn as he demanded to know who was stealing his business. The 3 ghosts jumped in fright, and the hanging ghost nervously looked Zai up and down, asking him who on earth he was. Zai pointed his watermelon knife fiercely at the 3 spirits, declaring that his identity didn't matter as much as his intentions. He informed them that he was kidnapping all 3 for the bounty, and demanded to know the name of this other bandit they mentioned. In Haicheng, he wouldn't allow anyone else to steal his business, causing the 3 ghosts to grow visibly nervous. The long-tongued ghost hesitated, asking if there was a possibility that the bandit they were talking about was actually him. The other 2 ghosts nodded in agreement, but Zai told them not to rely on mere feelings for such a serious accusation. He insisted they needed proof to avoid a mistake, to which the ghost with the knife in his chest replied that he had heard a specific name. The ghost mentioned the nickname Bandit Zai, causing our protagonist to pause and wonder if they were indeed talking about him. The 3 ghosts laughed, having guessed as much, since it was unlikely 2 such bandits would appear so quickly. Zai nodded, feeling relieved that no one was actually stealing his livelihood, but his smile vanished as quickly as it appeared. He glared at them, questioning why they thought they could leave now that they knew exactly who he was. The 3 spirits suddenly had a moment of clarity, realizing that their situation had become quite dire indeed. Zai gave a strange, low chuckle as he slowly drew his watermelon knife, telling them they had the right to remain silent. He warned that anything they said could be used against them, adding that they could try to resist if they thought they could handle his blade. As he brandished the weapon, the 2 divine weapon talismans on the blade emitted a power that terrified the 3 ghosts. They were completely stunned, realizing this truly was the terrifying Zai who had sent multiple ghosts to jail in a single night. Even a powerful spirit like the woman in the red wedding dress feared him, so they begged him not to hurt them. Immediately after, the ghost with the bullet hole in his head began to speak as well. They had heard rumors that the female ghost Zai kidnapped the night before had practically lost her mind after being taken to the station. The story was simply too frightening for them, and they decided right then and there not to offer any resistance at all. This left Zai feeling rather disappointed. He had spent all day practicing Taoist arts and crafting a magical weapon, only for them to surrender without a fight. This simply wouldn't do. He needed to test if his hard-earned cultivation actually worked, so he looked at the 3 spirits and spoke. He told them that being tied up without resisting would be far too humiliating and unfair for them, which was a fair point, really. But the ghosts insisted it wasn't unfair at all, claiming that being kidnapped by a bandit of his stature was entirely their own fault. They even prepared the ropes themselves, begging him to hurry, while Zai desperately insisted that they had to fight back first. Only then could he rightfully capture them, but the ghosts refused, using the hangman's rope to tie themselves together in a neat bundle. Zai was utterly stunned, wondering where his plan had gone off the rails, but he wasn't the type to give up so easily. Frowning, he accused them of insulting him just moments ago, which left the 3 ghosts blinking in total confusion as they shook their heads. They swore they hadn't said a word, but Zai doubled down with absolute certainty, declaring that if he said they insulted him, then they did. Using this imaginary insult as an excuse, he swung his blade and sliced through their ropes, effectively forcing them back into a confrontation. This sudden turn of events finally made the spirits realize the truth, as the knife-chest ghost asked if he just wanted an excuse to hit them. Zai stepped forward, casually denying it even as he swung his watermelon knife directly at them. To be honest, his actions said otherwise. The hangman ghost finally snapped, refusing to be bullied any longer, and lashed out with his long, ghost energy-infused tongue like a whip. Zai gave a dark little laugh, gathering true chi in his left hand to snatch the flying tongue right out of the air. He remarked that such a long tongue must make talking difficult and offered to perform a quick surgery, slicing off a section with his blade. When the knife-chest ghost lunged with long black claws, Zai met the attack with a backhand swing of his enchanted watermelon knife. The ghost's nails were shattered by the impact, and the force sent the spirit tumbling to the ground, while the bullet hole ghost watched from a distance. The 3rd ghost exhaled a blast of freezing spirit energy at Zai's face, prompting our protagonist to channel his remaining chi into his weapon. Bolstered by his internal energy and the divine talismans, the knife emitted a faint glow that sliced through the ghostly mist with ease. The residual light from the strike surged forward, chasing after the terrified spirits as they tried to scramble away. Zai gave a small grin and asked where they thought they were going, causing the three ghosts to immediately stop and surrender once more. Zai looked at them, completely dissatisfied, and told them they actually had to run, or else this was no fun. The three ghosts burst into tears, wondering what on earth this guy wanted from them. At this point, it wasn't hard to understand why the female ghost and the bride ghost had broken down before. With this kind of relentless pestering, who wouldn't lose their mind? The three spirits finally reached their limit. They snatched a phone from a passerby and immediately dialed a number. "Hello? Is this 910? We are criminal ghosts. Please, come and arrest us." The spirit police arrived quickly this time, and as soon as they appeared, the ghosts didn't even try to flee. The spirits practically crawled toward the officers, eagerly stretching out their hands and begging to be handcuffed and taken away immediately. They confessed to scaring people and doing bad things constantly, pleading to be locked up. The officers were utterly bewildered. To be honest, they had never seen such cooperative suspects. We have to wonder if ghosts these days just enjoy confessing. In the end, Zai accepted another 30,000 yuan in reward money, looking quite heartbroken about the whole ordeal. He laughed to himself, thinking how good it felt to earn money. But when he arrived home full of joy, he suddenly realized something was very wrong. There was a bright red bloody handprint on his door, and more importantly, the area around it was covered in writing. To provoke the bride ghost is to challenge the East Mountain Graveyard. The message continued. "Tonight, the East Mountain Graveyard declares." Zai frowned, trying to make sense of what this declaration was supposed to mean. Apparently, offending the bride ghost meant challenging the entire East Mountain Graveyard, and now they had come to leave a mark on his door tonight. As he muttered to himself, two ghosts slowly emerged from the shadows nearby, with one of them complaining about the quality of the message. The other ghost, who was holding a calligraphy brush, spoke up to defend his work, which, naturally, was the most important thing to worry about during a threat. As he spoke, that ghost added one last character to the door and then turned his head to look directly at Zai. Having finished their task, the two ghosts turned to leave without wasting a second, but Zai shouted for them to stop right where they were. He demanded to know who gave them permission to doodle all over his door. The two ghosts were stunned by his tone, asking if he hadn't read what they just wrote. They proudly declared they were from the East Mountain Graveyard and that their boss had sent them to write that message. The East Mountain boss, indeed. Zai scoffed, asking if they thought they were some kind of supernatural gang, and ordered them to wipe it off immediately. The ghosts were offended that he would even suggest such a thing. They reminded him that they were ghosts and that he was in big trouble, yet he still had the nerve to be arrogant. With that, the two spirits prepared to walk away. Zai didn't hesitate. He pulled his watermelon knife from his waist and charged at them. The ghost with the brush just sneered, unimpressed by the young man's approach. The ghost sneered, mentioning how the East Mountain Graveyard would torture him to death tonight, and with that, he took a deep, chilling breath. His head swelled up instantly before he exhaled a violent, howling gust of wind toward Zai, who simply tightened his grip on the watermelon knife. Focusing his true chi, Zai swung the blade downward, and the oncoming gale was instantly split in two, harmlessly whistling past his sides. The ghost admitted he had some skill but told him to try this next, suddenly extending a spectral claw that stretched out toward him. As the claw lengthened to grab him, Zai swung his blade with a sharp sound, causing the ghost to let out a piercing scream of agony. The severed claw fell to the ground and dissolved into black mist, while Zai charged forward and sent the one-handed ghost flying with a kick. The other ghost retreated in terror before desperately lashing out, but Zai's watermelon knife came down with relentless precision. He shattered the waves of ghostly energy one by one, and in the next heartbeat, he appeared directly in front of the trembling spirit. The ghost hid his hands behind his back, pleading for him to stay away because he was from the East Mountain Graveyard. Zai only laughed. He didn't care if they were the king of hell himself. They had dared to deface his door with nonsense, and now it was time to pay. He ordered them to clean the door immediately or be wiped from existence. Though, to be honest, total destruction was just a threat. Turning them into reward money was his real goal. To him, these weren't just two ghosts. They were two walking stacks of cash. Having witnessed his brutality, the two spirits didn't dare argue. They walked to the door with long faces and began scrubbing the writing away. Once the door was clean, they both looked at him as if to say they were finished, but Zai just pointed toward his messy living room. He told them to clean the inside as well, leaving the two ghosts stunned as they tried to explain they weren't the ones who made the mess. Zai didn't care who started it. He just wanted it clean, a demand that made the two spirits look like they were on the verge of tears. Imagine the scene. They arrived to deliver a grand challenge, only to be mocked, beaten, and forced into manual labor as janitors. Now they were being exploited for free labor. If word got out, their boss would be shocked, and every ghost in the city would fall silent. Zai was quite pleased once the cleaning was done, noting that while the work was decent, they had missed a few small details. One ghost asked hopefully if they could finally leave now that the house was spotless. Zai told them to wait just one more moment. Zai told them he would arrange for someone to come and pick them up, which, naturally, made the spirits feel a strange sense of relief. He assured them everything was handled, then pulled out his phone and dialed the spiritual police, asking if they could send a team over. After reporting that he had 2 ghosts in custody, he hung up and told the spirits not to worry, as their ride would arrive shortly. For a moment, the 2 ghosts were actually touched, thinking he wasn't such a bad guy after all, but that feeling didn't last long. A police car pulled up outside, and the officer Jinya entered with her team, carrying 20,000 yuan in reward money for the Great Master. She praised his incredible efficiency, while the 2 ghosts stood there in a state of complete shock, staring at Zai in utter confusion. He asked them what they expected. Did they think he was sending them to university? The 2 spirits could only exchange a bewildered look. Without wasting any time, Jinya and her team loaded the 2 ghosts into the car, leaving them to glare back at Zai with pure resentment. Zai just laughed, knowing only a fool would let them go. He needed to stay safe and grow his resources while he had the chance. As the police left, a red bridal sedan appeared in the distance, carrying a vengeful ghost bride and a terrified, pitiful-looking Su Ming. The ghost bride stared at him with eyes full of malice before delivering a harsh, chilling warning directly to his face. With her message delivered, the red sedan flew off into the night, leaving only the echoing sound of the ghost bride's mocking laughter. Zai's expression darkened instantly. He decided it was time to see just how arrogant this East Mountain graveyard truly was. He called Jinya back immediately, asking her to secure as much dynamite as possible, regardless of the cost. The more, the better. Jinya agreed and hung up, leaving Zai to spend the rest of the night cultivating and further increasing his spiritual power. The next morning, Jinya arrived and pointed to a small truck behind her, which was loaded with over 2,000 pounds of explosives. She hadn't asked what he needed them for the night before, but now, her curiosity finally got the better of her. Zai gave a cold laugh, stating he intended to level the East Mountain graveyard to show those spirits the price of threatening him. Upon hearing his plan, Jinya was left completely speechless, unable to process the sheer scale of the destruction he was proposing. Surveying the area, Zai let out a cold sneer, thinking that if these ghosts wanted to play games, he was more than ready. Zai declared that he wouldn't even give them a chance to regret it, and grabbing a shovel from the truck, he began walking slowly toward the graveyard. Under the scorching sun, he began digging one deep pit after another, carefully burying the crates of gunpowder until everything was finally ready. Finding an open space, he sat cross-legged to continue his cultivation, watching as the minutes ticked by and the sky began to darken. Several cars soon arrived, and alongside Jinya was a female reporter who began her broadcast, welcoming viewers to the Supernatural Channel's live stream. She explained that they had received news last night that the ghosts of East Mountain Graveyard had suddenly declared war on a mysterious cultivator. Now that they had arrived at the site, they prepared to broadcast this long-awaited battle while under the protection of Jinya's police team. As night fell, a chilling wind began to howl, and the surrounding air grew thick with a heavy, suffocating ghostly energy. The atmosphere was truly terrifying, but Zai simply stood up, drew his cleaver from his waist, and let out a thunderous shout. He called out for the clowns of East Mountain Graveyard to come out and take their beating, a roar that sent shockwaves through all of Haicheng. The ghosts here were used to being arrogant, terrifying people, and committing evil acts without anyone daring to stand in their way. Even the police wouldn't rashly enter the graveyard to cause trouble, provided the spirits didn't cross a certain line, of course. But today, someone had arrived who wasn't just unafraid, but had come specifically to meet them, which, to most observers, looked like a suicide mission. At that moment, the ghostly energy in the graveyard intensified tenfold, and shadowy figures began flickering through the trees in rapid succession. Soon, a wide variety of horrifying spirits appeared all around him, each more grotesque than the last, creating a truly nightmare-inducing scene. Watching from a distance, the police officers felt their faces pale. To be honest, the sheer number of ghosts was overwhelming. It was like a few ordinary officers facing a massive mob. They could handle one or two, but the sheer volume of enemies was another matter entirely. Zai looked at the hundreds of spirits and remarked with a sneer that, as expected of this graveyard, not a single one of them looked decent. The air in the graveyard instantly froze into a terrifying silence, as his words had essentially poked at a very painful collective wound. We should remember that since ancient times, those buried here had lived pitiful lives, so his comment was more than just a simple insult. It was as if he had ripped open their scars, rubbed in salt, and then asked them quite calmly if it happened to hurt. These words instantly enraged every spirit present, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or turning back. Just as the mob of ghosts was about to attack in a fury, a sedan chair flew in from the distance and landed steadily on the ground. Inside, the ghost bride glared at Zai. Beside her sat the bound Su Ming'er, who, fortunately, appeared to be physically unharmed. However, the girl looked pale with fright, and as the bride mocked his bravery, Zai simply let out a cold, defiant laugh. He asked her why he wouldn't dare come, given how well she knew his strength, a comment that made the ghost bride flush with indignant rage. She told him to prepare for death, but Zai joked that he hadn't realized she was so infatuated with him after their brief encounter in the sedan. He teased that she clearly couldn't live without him if she was so desperate for him to die and join her, a statement meant to provoke everyone. The onlookers were left utterly confused by these words, sensing there was some scandalous secret between the two that they weren't privy to. Meanwhile, the live stream's comment section exploded, with viewers marveling at Zai's audacity and his reputation as a true madman. Judging by the bride's reaction, many fans joked that Zai must have done something truly unspeakable to her during their last meeting. They couldn't believe a man actually existed who was bold enough to flirt with a vengeful spirit, but the ghost bride had finally reached her limit. She spat back that once he was dead, she would tear his soul to shreds, so he couldn't even remain a ghost, confident in her overwhelming numbers. Realizing there was nothing left to discuss, Zai's eyes turned cold as the bride ordered her minions to swarm him and destroy his soul. She was well aware that if a degenerate powerhouse like Zai were allowed to become a ghost, the consequences would be catastrophic. She knew that if he were given even a moment to adapt to the afterlife, he would become more brutal than any spirit currently in the graveyard. Therefore, he had to be erased the very instant he died. Otherwise, they would all be finished, and so the command was given. The lonely souls and wild ghosts of the graveyard immediately lunged at him, a sight that left the distant police officers trembling with fear. And yet, we see Zai remain perfectly calm, tightening his grip on his cleaver as he spoke one last time in a flat, steady voice. He offered them one final chance, release the girl and apologize, and he would act as if none of this had ever happened. The ghosts of the graveyard genuinely thought he had lost his mind. After all, he was facing hundreds of enemies and still making demands. To an outsider, it might have looked like hundreds of spirits were hunting a single ghost, so the mob completely ignored Zai's threat and continued their charge. He simply smiled, realizing that he would have to claim his bonus tonight after all, as his left hand reached for the detonator in his pocket. After pressing a few buttons, several terrifying explosions suddenly rocked the Dongshan graveyard, sending shockwaves through the desolate earth. The center of the rising hillside erupted in a series of blasts, sending clouds of dust and ancient bones flying into the air. Some bones were pulverized instantly by the force, and at that same moment, at least a dozen ghosts let out agonizing screams of pain. It was clear that because their physical remains were being destroyed, they felt the impact directly, leaving the rest of the spirits completely stunned. We see them staring blankly at the blast sites, their spectral forms trembling with a very real sense of shock and fear at such raw power. Then, every ghost turned to look at Zai, never imagining in their wildest dreams that this man would resort to a physical strike against the supernatural. Even the ghost bride in her red sedan was left speechless. She had invited him for a fight, not to have her ancestors' graves blown to bits. This was certainly not following the usual rules of engagement, but Zai just chuckled, asking if they found it exciting since he had 10 more detonators ready. He told them not to worry and to just wait their turn, promising to detonate them one by one until all their bones were unearthed. The gathered spirits were utterly baffled by this absurd tactic, staring at him with a single, unified thought echoing in their minds. They wondered if this man was the true devil. Using bombs to wage physical warfare against ghosts is hardly what one would call normal human behavior. At this point, the lonely souls and wild ghosts had no idea how to proceed, as their very foundations were now under direct threat. This was no small matter, as their remains were their source of power. If the bones were damaged, their souls would suffer the consequences. From the crowd, a white-haired old ghost stepped forward, radiating a powerful spectral energy that marked him as a formidable leader. He spoke up, noting that Zai was the first person to ever use explosives against them, and to be perfectly honest, it was quite effective. He admitted they were caught completely off guard, but Zai merely snorted and asked the old spirit who he was supposed to be. The old ghost identified himself as the boss of this graveyard, pointing toward the ghost bride in the sedan chair to explain their connection. She was his granddaughter, which explained why the entire graveyard was helping her, but Zai told the old man he wasn't interested in small talk. Zai told them he was busy and ready to blow the graveyard to bits, prompting the old ghost, clearly worried about their remains, to shout for him to wait. The old spirit argued that Zai had bullied his granddaughter, which had caused the Dongshan graveyard to lose a significant amount of face. He suggested a compromise where they both take a step back, proposing that Zai simply kneel and apologize to his granddaughter to settle the matter. If he did that, the spirits of Dongshan would consider the debt paid and wouldn't pursue any further grievances against him. The old ghost claimed this would show how generous they were, but Zai just stared at him in silence, which, to be honest, was a bit unsettling. As the silence stretched on, the old ghost began to feel a bit nervous under that gaze, but before he could speak again, a massive explosion rocked the earth. Zai detonated another crate of explosives, blowing a massive crater into the ground and sending dust and shattered bones flying in every direction. Another dozen ghosts were left reeling as their physical remains were damaged again, leaving the entire spectral assembly absolutely terrified by the display. Even the police watching from a distance were stunned, while the live stream chat was flooded with comments praising Zai's sheer audacity in this moment. The old ghost's face paled as he begged Zai to be reasonable and not act on impulse, but Zai wasn't interested in his version of a negotiation. He scoffed at the idea of kneeling, pointing out the obvious fact that he was the one who currently had the entire graveyard surrounded with explosives. He wondered aloud why they thought they were in a position to set conditions, and the old ghost quickly backtracked, saying an apology alone would suffice. Another blast echoed through the air, causing the ghosts of the graveyard to perform a very literal and public display of pure, unadulterated terror. The white-haired old ghost was truly panicking now, pleading with Zai to stop the destruction before everything they had was lost. He shouted that Zai didn't even have to apologize anymore, but Zai had no intention of humoring the old spirit's shifting demands. He pressed 2 more detonators in quick succession, sending clouds of debris into the air as the ghosts scattered in a state of total, chaotic frenzy. Desperate to save what was left, the old ghost cried out that they would be the ones to apologize if he would only stop the explosions. He even offered to have the ghosts kneel to him, but a sudden blast erupted right beneath the old spirit's feet, unearthing his own ancient remains. The explosion pulverized his bones instantly, causing his spectral energy to flicker wildly as he let out a cry of pure shock and pain. A final series of explosions followed, nearly leveling the entire Dongshan graveyard and leaving nothing behind but a landscape of dust and shattered history. We see the air thick with a mixture of ghostly energy and the acrid smell of gunpowder as hundreds of spirits linger around the cratered ruins of the graveyard. Their expressions are grim, and with their physical remains shattered by the blasts, not a single ghost remains in a stable state. They all feel it. Their very souls are uncomfortable, some even feeling as though they might dissipate entirely, and even the white-haired old ghost is visibly trembling. Suddenly, he glares at Zai and lets out a furious roar, calling him a scoundrel and swearing that he won't leave this place alive. He threatens to tear Zai apart, but Zai simply draws his watermelon knife and calmly points out that all their spirits are already severely wounded. He mocks them for talking tough, but the old ghost snaps back that even in their weakened state, their sheer numbers are enough to kill him. With a final howl from the white-haired leader, every ghost still capable of moving charges toward Zai, who only responds with a dark, knowing smile. He grips his blade and slashes at the first ghost to reach him, causing a shower of sparks to fly as the metal connects with the spectral form. The ghost screams and is sent flying back, a deep wound leaking spiritual energy, as Zai immediately begins swinging his blade in a steady rhythm. Every spirit that dares to draw near is met with a precise strike. Now, if these ghosts were fighting a traditional Taoist, things might be different. Even in this poor state, using spells against so many would be exhausting, but Zai has chosen a much more direct approach with his knife. For him, this is really just a matter of physical stamina, as the damaged spirits lunge at him with what can only be described as a lack of conviction. He doesn't bother with complex incantations, simply taking them down one by one with high efficiency and, to be honest, absolutely zero pressure. This scene leaves the nearby police officers completely stunned, as it looks less like a supernatural battle and more like a common street brawl. Even Jinya swallows hard, remarking to himself that he never realized ghosts could be handled in such a practical manner. It seems he's discovered a whole new world of possibilities, silently acknowledging that Zai is truly in a league of his own while the ghosts lose heart. The spirits of the graveyard are becoming increasingly timid. Their bones are gone and their souls are weak, making their desperate lunges quite ineffective. In reality, their attacks can barely scratch him, while the knife in Zai's hand is empowered by divine runes that cut through them like paper. Combined with his sheer ferocity, he drops a ghost with every single swing, and in the blink of an eye, more than half of them are down. And so, wielding nothing but a watermelon knife and his internal energy, he carves a path from the eastern slope of the graveyard all the way to the west. He didn't even blink, and his eyes didn't feel dry for a second as countless ghosts soon lay on the ground wailing in agony. Not only were their remains blasted to bits, but they were all now more or less wounded by his blade, even as the white-haired old ghost charged like a madman. When the spirit lunged, Zai nearly severed one of its arms. In truth, that white-haired ghost was actually quite powerful. But with his physical remains destroyed, he was now so weak he couldn't lay a finger on Zai, and he collapsed after taking a heavy blow from the knife. The spirit lay on the ground crying out in pain, and when he looked up at Zai again, his eyes were filled with nothing but pure regret. If he had known he was provoking such a relentless brute, he never would have declared war. Now, his bones were dust and his soul was shredded. Soon, nearly 100 ghosts were severely wounded, and as the spiritual mist dissipated, we see Zai standing there, gripping his knife and breathing heavily. He muttered that he was a bit tired, while the nearby police officers nearly fainted. After all, the man had just fought off over 100 ghosts alone. to do all that, and then simply complain about being tired. They wondered if he was even human as Zai walked toward the red sedan chair. Inside the sedan, the ghost bride was completely paralyzed with fear. She knew he was strong, but she never imagined he was this terrifying. This was the first time she had ever feared a human this much, even more than when she encountered the legendary Taoist master Jiu a century ago. As the ghost bride sat there in a daze, perhaps from shock or simply failing to process the situation, Zai didn't pay her much mind. He stepped forward and reached into the sedan to pull Su Man'er out, asking if she was all right, to which she simply shook her head. She blinked her large eyes, finding it hard to believe he would cause such a massive scene just to save her. It was quite the grand gesture. To her, this felt far more romantic than any fairy tale, but while she was lost in her emotions, Zai turned his gaze toward the ghost bride. The ghost bride looked back at him with an incredibly complex expression, and for a long moment, Zai remained silent. Then, with a deep and heartfelt sigh, he told her quite honestly that before meeting her, he had never imagined such a thing. The atmosphere suddenly became heavy with emotion, and the ghost bride's heart trembled, expecting a sentimental confession of some sort. Sure enough, Zai looked up at the sky at a dramatic 45-degree angle and admitted that before meeting her, he truly hadn't realized something. He never thought someone would make their own rules just to let people take advantage of them for free. The ghost bride's face froze as she began to tremble. It was truly heartbreaking, and with a slight shake of his head, Zai continued, saying there was something else he hadn't expected. The ghost bride looked at him with a flicker of hope, thinking there might be a sentimental twist, but then she heard his next words. He admitted he never imagined he could take advantage of them for free and still get a bonus. The ghost bride's body shook violently. In the next moment, she let out a desperate roar, calling him a piece of trash. Her heart and spirit were utterly crushed by his words. Zai simply chuckled and walked away happily, feeling that tonight's events had dealt a significant blow to the local supernatural underworld. Thinking of this, he muttered to himself that after working so hard against these ghosts, the bonus would surely be substantial. Su Man'er was stunned for a moment, but Zai quickly corrected her, clarifying the true nature of his mission. He explained he came for the bonus and saved her as a side benefit. Su Man'er's delicate face froze before she managed a wry smile. Zai frowned and turned back to the ghosts, suggesting they should just take her back, not even waiting for her to react. The ghosts scrambled away in terror. After all, one kidnapping attempt had already resulted in their home being blown up and their kin slaughtered. Asking them to try again felt like a trap, so under the fearful gaze of the spirits, we see Zai finally leaving the burial grounds. He walked over to the spiritual police, where a dozen officers were looking at him with nothing but pure, unadulterated admiration. The female officer, Jinya, couldn't wait to tell him that since he had dealt such a blow to the ghosts, she would apply for his bonus. She estimated at least 100,000 yuan, noting that since not all spirits there were evil, some wouldn't be arrested. Zai let out a yawn and began to leave with Su Man'er, but after a few steps, he suddenly turned and roared at the ghosts. He warned them that despite the beating they took, they had better come to his door and apologize personally, or else. With that, he walked away with a swagger, leaving the ghosts fuming in silence. The following evening, a new scene unfolded. Zai grabbed his watermelon knife, preparing to go out and rob some more ghosts, but he froze the moment he opened his door. A massive crowd of over 100 lonely ghosts was kneeling outside, including the white-haired old spirit from the burial grounds. Even the ghost bride was there kneeling among them. It seems they had all finally realized just how serious their situation was. He knew that if they didn't come to apologize properly, heaven only knows how he would have dealt with them. After all, in the face of absolute violence, even the most stubborn spirits must bow down. Behind this ghostly crowd, we see a line of police cars parked and waiting. Many spiritual officers were looking at Zai with pure awe, and they weren't alone. Nearby, a group of Taoists, monks, and exorcists had gathered. They had come to witness the spectacle, having missed the action the night before. A mass apology from 100 ghosts was too good to pass up. Everyone watching the scene felt a deep sense of admiration for him. Making so many ghosts kneel and apologize was truly unheard of. It was destined to become a legendary tale in Haiching's supernatural circles. Zai stood with his hands behind his back and calmly asked the crowd, "What's this? Didn't the spiritual police lock you up? They should have at least charged you with brawling." The white-haired old ghost could only think to himself that it wasn't a brawl, it was a one-sided beating. He explained that they had been processed and were all facing jail time. The police had simply given them a chance to stop here first, since Zai had demanded they apologize on their knees. Only then did he remember his own threat. He nodded, noting their correct attitude, and told them they could leave. The ghosts finally stood up and filed into the police vans in an orderly fashion. Even the ghost bride rose, her eyes filled with lingering terror. Once the spirits were taken away, Jinya approached him holding a bank card. She explained the card was from the spiritual police and contained 500,000 yuan, his bonus for clearing out the Dongshan burial grounds. He took the money without any pretense this time. Jinya then mentioned that her director had a message for the great boss Zai. He simply nodded, asking if she was heading out to maintain world peace again. Jinya couldn't help but let out a small laugh. She admitted she was exhausted after sleeping all day, but she shared some news. The spiritual police department was undergoing a bit of a change. They were actually planning to replace their demon-subduing batons with watermelon knives, thinking they might be more powerful. To be honest, that sounds a bit excessive. Zai pointed out that a group of officers chasing ghosts through the streets with watermelon knives might look bad, and Genia had to agree. He told her to get back to work while he went off to find more ghosts to clean up. After Genia left for her patrol, we see a change in his expression. A massive grin spread across his face. He knew hunting ghosts was profitable, but he never imagined it would be this lucrative. 500,000 yuan for one night's work was more than he could earn in years at the factory. Right then, he decided to make this his full-time career. He was already dreaming of reaching the pinnacle of life through his new earnings, but just as he was envisioning this bright future, something happened. A sharp, raspy voice suddenly rang out, asking him a question. Zai looked around, wondering who on earth was speaking to him. The voice told him to look down, and as we follow his gaze, he realized the speaker was right there at his feet. To his surprise, a strange little creature with massive eyes was staring directly up at him. Naturally, his first reaction was pure shock. He asked what kind of cat has such a long neck, which caused the creature to pause, its face twisting into a very human expression of annoyance. It opened its mouth and, in perfect human speech, snapped back, asking who he was calling a cat. It found the comparison quite insulting. It clarified that it was a weasel, though Zai noted it looked remarkably like a cat. It was, after all, his first time seeing one. The creature insisted on asking a question that had to be answered, and Zai agreed, casually beckoning the weasel to come a little closer. He urged it to step even nearer, which the weasel found quite strange. Usually, people were far more hesitant during these encounters. The creature remembered stories from its elders about seeking a title, where even cultivators would be wary of a weasel's words. Yet this man wasn't running away. In fact, he seemed entirely unafraid and was even encouraging the creature to close the distance. Something felt off, but the weasel approached anyway and began its ritual question, asking what it looked like, only for Zai to cut it off. Zai insisted that the creature answer one of his questions first. The weasel was stunned, as this was definitely not how the script was supposed to go. The creature argued that it had spoken first, but Zai shook his head, refusing to cooperate unless he got to go first. To be honest, he was being quite difficult. The weasel asked if he realized he was threatening a great immortal, but Zai simply shrugged, acting as if he were ready to walk away. Panicking, the creature called him back and surrendered the first turn. Zai then turned and asked if he looked like a good man or a bandit. The weasel studied him carefully and admitted that, with his current vibe, he really did look like a bandit. Zai simply nodded in agreement. The creature eagerly tried to start its own question again, but Zai stopped it once more, claiming he had just one more thing to ask. He asked if the spiritual police had a policy of giving rewards for capturing monsters, and if there would be a bounty for the weasel itself. The weasel frowned and thought about it seriously, admitting there probably was a reward. Zai smiled, and that was when the creature realized its mistake. Not yet realizing the gravity of the situation, she wondered why he was asking such strange questions, unaware of what was coming. In Zai's eyes, she had already become prey, yet the weasel simply asked if it was finally its turn to speak. It asked if it looked like a human or a god, but with a dark smile, Zai replied that it looked like a walking 10,000 yuan. Before the creature could process that, Zai suddenly stepped forward, pointing his watermelon knife directly at the weasel. He told it that it was now being kidnapped and warned it not to resist, or else the blade would come down. The weasel stared up at him with wide, confused eyes, stuttering out a question about why on earth he was kidnapping it. Zai pointed out that since it called him a bandit, kidnapping was only natural. The creature stammered that it was a great immortal. It couldn't believe a human was actually kidnapping a spirit, but Zai didn't care about its titles and told it to shut up. He ordered it to move or face the consequences, showing no mercy to the creature, who was now completely shell-shocked. The weasel muttered in disbelief that this wasn't how it imagined things. Humans were supposed to be terrified and begging for mercy. Seeking a title was supposed to be easy, and it began to wonder if all those beautiful stories were just lies. It questioned if the elders had deceived it, and if the human world was actually this dangerous all along. It felt the city was full of traps, though in reality, it was just Zai's personal trap that was the problem. This was Zai's first time kidnapping a monster, and to be honest, he felt a small, strange spark of excitement. The trembling creature asked where it was being taken, fearing it might be trafficked or have its organs sold on the black market. Zai told it was overthinking things, as nobody would want to buy a weasel anyway, which the creature found quite offensive. It argued its fur was genuine and valuable, but Zai assured it he wasn't after its skin, leaving the creature even more puzzled. It wondered if it was being sent to a forced labor camp, having heard rumors of dark factories that exploit their workers. The weasel's fur stood on end as it imagined a bleak future of turning screws for 18 hours a day without pay. Zai told it to stop its wild imagination, clarifying that he was simply taking it to jail, a revelation that left it speechless. The weasel looked as if it had been struck by lightning, but Zai was done talking. Luckily, a police station was just ahead. He immediately led the creature toward the entrance, where an officer soon approached and asked how he could help. The officer was naturally on high alert after spotting the creature, but Zai simply explained he had caught a monster to claim a reward. The officer looked at him with sudden admiration, asking if he was the famous Zai. He just smiled, calling it a hollow title. The officer told him to wait while he contacted Jinya, the specific agent responsible for coordinating with him. Jinya arrived shortly after being called, praising his idol for catching another monster so soon after they had last parted ways. The weasel spoke up nervously, insisting it was a great immortal and begging them not to throw it in jail. When Jinya asked what crimes the creature had committed, Zai turned to the weasel and demanded an answer. He barked at the creature to confess its misdeeds, causing the terrified weasel to stammer that it had done nothing wrong. Zai didn't believe it, listing off offenses like swearing, public urination, spitting, or even stealing candy from children. He didn't want his hard-earned reward to vanish because the monster was too innocent, yet the weasel insisted it was clean. With a look of pure disbelief, Zai asked who it was trying to fool, claiming an animal must have at least relieved itself in public. His eyes widened when the creature explained that mountain spirits actually go into the villages specifically to use public restrooms. He wondered if monsters were truly this civilized now, worrying that his reward would be at risk if it hadn't done anything illegal. Noticing Jinya's strange look, Zai coughed awkwardly and tried to rephrase his concern. He explained that if the creature was innocent, people might think he was just kidnapping random monsters for the money. The weasel was on the verge of tears, looking utterly wronged, which left Zai feeling quite embarrassed by the situation. It seemed he couldn't justify sending such a civilized creature to jail, so Jinya decided to step in. He prepared to interrogate the weasel himself to confirm whether it truly had a spotless record. And so, we see Jinya turn his full attention to the trembling creature to begin the official questioning. The weasel looked remarkably calm, leaving Jinya at a complete loss for words, as he was used to having concrete evidence before making an arrest. Usually, a monster is caught for a specific crime, but today he was simply asking if it had ever done anything wrong. He turned to Zai for guidance. Zai felt a bit helpless, realizing he couldn't exactly force an innocent creature into a cell, so he finally admitted the mistake. He sighed, telling the officer that since the creature was clean, he must have simply gotten things mixed up this time. With that settled, he decided to head back out into the night to see if any actual troublemaking spirits were lurking about. Jinya smiled as he watched him leave, while the weasel blinked its large eyes and looked up at the officer expectantly. The creature was stunned by the warning it received. After all, if a human says a spirit is just a man, it ruins their spiritual cultivation. But if they say it's a god, the human is forced to offer worship, even if they don't want to, which naturally creates a conflict. Essentially, if the weasel insisted on seeking a human's validation for its divinity, it would almost certainly end up breaking the law. This left the poor creature quite confused, as reality was turning out to be nothing like the stories it had heard back home. Other weasels had claimed that descending the mountain to seek validation was easy and led to a life of luxury and worship. Yet here it was, kidnapped the moment it arrived, nearly thrown in jail, and now being lectured, and they were all supposedly the same species. Deep down, it wondered why its fate was so cruel, and the thought brought actual tears to its eyes, much to Jinya's surprise. The officer couldn't help but ask what was wrong, seeing the monster so genuinely distraught. Weeping bitterly, the weasel turned and trudged away, but after a short distance, it spotted Zai ahead and hurried to catch up. Zai realized he was being followed and turned around, asking the creature what on earth it wanted now. When it asked for shelter, he scoffed, explaining that he was busy enough trying to feed himself without taking on a freeloading monster. He paused when the creature claimed it could help him earn money, jokingly asking if it meant selling its own fur, but the weasel shook its head. It insisted that monsters could find jobs, which left Zai wondering who in their right mind would hire a weasel for manual labor. He was genuinely skeptical, until the creature mentioned a fox spirit it knew who was already living in the city and earning a steady paycheck. The weasel explained that the fox had invited it to visit, which made Zai wonder why it wasn't seeking shelter with her instead of him. The creature insisted it was different. Since it wanted to become a celestial spirit, it specifically needed a human's validation to succeed. It essentially wanted a human to set up a shrine and offer worship, a request that Zai found increasingly absurd as he repeated it back. He asked sarcastically if he should also bow to it and provide 3 daily offerings of fruit, tea, and wine. When he asked if that would be enough, the weasel's eyes lit up with excitement as it eagerly asked if he was being serious. Zai slowly pulled out his cleaver, looking at the creature with a murderous glare as he asked if it truly wanted to find out. The weasel shrunk back, swallowing hard as it quickly decided it didn't need the 3 offerings or the fruit and tea after all. It waved its paws frantically, insisting he was being far too kind and that the whole idea of worship had just been a little joke. When Zai asked if it still wanted a shrine, it hesitated for a second before he told it to get lost, as he had no time for games. The poor creature whimpered, wondering why simply getting a small shrine set up was proving to be such an impossible task. Zai recalled the warning about not using spiritual tricks to harm people, but he hesitated, thinking that if the weasel could actually earn money. taking it in might not be the worst idea. So he asked what exactly this fox spirit did for a living. The weasel matter-of-factly replied that she raised chickens, which made Zai's eyes widen in complete disbelief at the sudden answer. The creature insisted it was very profitable, while Zai muttered that of course it was, though it wasn't exactly the job he had imagined. He had expected something far more inspiring than poultry farming, and he could hardly believe his ears as the weasel continued. He pointed out that a fox spirit shouldn't have to resort to such simple labor in the city when there were surely better ways to make a living. The weasel simply stated that she only knew how to raise chickens, and had even planned to apprentice under her, despite being a male. Zai was stunned that a male weasel wanted to learn the trade, lamenting to himself how much the world's standards had truly fallen. It seemed even monsters weren't what they used to be, but then a thought occurred to him. If humans can get in trouble for this, surely spirits can too. He began to imagine capturing the fox spirit and turning her over to the authorities for a reward, which, to be honest, was a very Zai-like plan. Zai turned to the weasel and asked exactly where this fox spirit was, only to learn she had opened a shop in a remote alleyway. The weasel happily led the way, while Zai took a deep breath, telling himself that the situation was far more scandalous than he imagined. It was simply too brazen, and so, for the sake of justice, or perhaps the potential reward, he decided he had to investigate personally. We follow them through several streets until they finally reach a narrow alley, where the weasel announced they had found the fox spirit. Zai scanned the surroundings with a skeptical snort, noting that the place didn't look like a reputable establishment at all. Just then, a girl with a perfect figure appeared ahead, wearing a headpiece that looked remarkably like a pair of fox ears. She was walking with her head down, carefully counting a small handful of loose change, her face still hidden from their view. Even so, her striking appearance and long legs made it quite clear that this spirit was exceptionally beautiful. As we get closer, we can hear her muttering quietly to herself about her earnings for the day. Zai was genuinely shocked to hear that such a beautiful monster only made 300 yuan after a full day of raising chickens. He wondered if the market had really become that difficult. Apparently, making a living was hard no matter what species you were. Despite his brief moment of reflection, he felt no pity for her, so he stepped forward and shouted for the fox spirit to stop. Startled, she looked up and politely explained that she was already closed, suggesting he return tomorrow morning if he needed anything. Zai's eyes widened in indignation as he told her not to talk nonsense, insisting he wasn't the kind of person she took him for. With a sudden movement, he drew his cleaver and stepped forward, pressing the blade firmly against the fox spirit's side. He snatched the 300 yuan from her hand, declaring that he was confiscating such ill-gotten gains as she stood there frozen. Her hands hovered in the air, unsure where to go, as she looked at him with pitiful eyes and asked what he thought he was doing. When the man demanded to know why his money was being taken, our protagonist simply stood his ground. He told him flatly that since it was ill-gotten wealth anyway, he had no qualms about taking it. Tears began to well up in her eyes as she stammered that this was a robbery, which Zai found to be a rather obvious observation. He scoffed, asking if she expected him to give her money instead, just as the weasel rushed forward to see what was happening. Zai questioned why he shouldn't take her money or point a blade at her, convinced that her chicken business justified the confiscation. He even threatened to throw her in jail, leaving the weasel utterly shocked that such a trade could actually be against the law. Zai snorted at the question, while the weasel looked on in disbelief, muttering that the human world simply had too many rules. He wondered why everything seemed to be a crime, just as the fox girl spoke up, indignantly demanding to know why she was being accused. When Zai asked what her profession was, she admitted to running a chicken shop, which, in his mind, only made her crimes even more flagrant. He demanded she take him to the shop to gather evidence, having learned from his encounter with the weasel to be more thorough this time. He planned to call Jinya once he had proof, so the fox girl led him to her storefront and opened the door to let him inside. Zai's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he saw the interior. It was, quite literally, a shop full of actual chickens. There was a glass oven filled with seasoned birds ready for roasting, along with a massive pot of braised chicken and basins of fried wings. The entire shop was dedicated to poultry, causing Zai to swallow hard as he realized she really was just a cook. The fox girl and the weasel both stared at him in total confusion until Zai coughed awkwardly, admitting he had misunderstood the nature of her work. He sheepishly returned the 300 yuan, which she accepted with a smile, relieved that the whole ordeal was just a simple mistake. Deep down, he wondered if all monsters were this naive, as she didn't even bother to ask for a more detailed explanation. Whether other spirits were that innocent remained to be seen, but this fox girl certainly was, as she dropped the matter entirely. Instead, she turned to the weasel, whom she called Brother Huang, and asked why he still hadn't mastered the art of taking human form. The weasel explained he had chosen the path of incense and offerings, which required him to be recognized by humans to increase his power. The fox girl nodded in understanding before turning her gaze back towards Zai, which brought the conversation back to the weasel's plight. Zai simply curled his lip, feeling a bit annoyed by the sudden shift in the emotional atmosphere. After all, he told himself, he didn't owe this creature anything. However, after a brief silence, Zai relented, offering to take the weasel in and even provide a small shrine for him at home. But there was a catch. The weasel would have to pay for living expenses, rent, and even utilities, a list of fees that seemed never-ending. The poor creature wondered who was really serving whom, while the fox girl watched the scene unfold with an amused expression. Zai let out a cold snort, questioning what a spirit like her could possibly do for him, given the nature of his true profession. When the fox girl shook her head, he introduced himself as the infamous Zai the Bandit, a man who hunts malevolent spirits by night. She looked at him with wide, shocked eyes, admitting she had never heard of such a person, her lips pouting in genuine confusion. Zai's confidence instantly crumbled as he realized his supposed fame over the last 2 days hadn't actually reached her ears yet. He asked if she even watched the news, to which she replied that she had seen a major headline just that evening. She mentioned a massive incident that occurred in the east of the city, and Zai stood tall, hands on his hips, assuming she meant him. He waited for her to acknowledge his power, but she instead explained that a large poultry farm had been maliciously poisoned. This meant the price of chicken was about to skyrocket, making her inventory much more expensive, a tragedy in her eyes, certainly. She asked if he was involved in the poisoning, causing Zai to slowly lower his hands and decide that the conversation was officially over. The fox girl quickly invited him to stay for a meal since he was already there, and after a moment's hesitation, Zai agreed. After tasting the fox sister's cooking, he noticed it was already midnight. He was in a hurry to go out and capture ghosts, so he didn't linger. The weasel spirit, terrified of seeking a blessing from anyone else, decided to follow him no matter what. He didn't agree immediately, of course. He decided to see if he could put the creature to good use. After all, as a Han bandit, having a monster lackey made a certain kind of sense. The real question was whether this little spirit was reliable. If it could provide value and profit, he might just keep it around. Turning to the weasel spirit behind him, he told it that following him meant doing actual work. Naturally, the creature agreed instantly. The fox sister, having closed up her shop for the night, decided to tag along as well. When asked what they were doing, he replied that they were going to commit a robbery. He was a bandit, after all. What else would they do? Work in a factory? As the fox sister looked at the weasel spirit with concern, he reassured them. They were only robbing the monsters and ghosts who did evil. Once she realized he wasn't just acting recklessly, the fox sister finally felt at ease, and without another word, Zai led her and the weasel spirit into the night. As they wandered the streets, we see a strange figure ahead, hopping and jumping along. Zai wondered aloud what on earth that creature could be. He turned to the weasel spirit, who took a quick look and noted that it appeared to be a zombie, a fairly common sight back in the mountains. Zai was surprised to find a zombie wandering the city, but then his eyes lit up with a sudden thought. Where there are zombies, there are usually tombs. He wondered if such a tomb might be filled with valuable antiques. The weasel spirit hesitated, assuming that was likely, and Zai immediately gave chase. With a loud shout, he ordered the creature to stop. The zombie froze in surprise and turned around, revealing herself to be a female zombie. She studied him closely, clearly shocked that anyone would dare be out late at night, let alone have the nerve to call out to a monster like her. Thinking she could end this quickly, she bared her fangs and snarled to scare him off. However, things didn't exactly go according to her plan. The very moment she flashed her terrifying expression, she realized that Zai was already standing there, casually wielding a large watermelon knife. The female zombie would later admit she felt a surge of panic, but it was far too late for her to react to the sudden escalation. That watermelon knife was already pressed firmly against her throat. To be honest, she didn't truly believe such an ordinary-looking blade could hurt her. And yet, she found herself completely paralyzed by the sheer intensity of his aura. It was a zombie, all right, there was no mistaking that now. Zai demanded to know why she was sneaking around at night, instead of staying in her grave. His stern scolding caught her completely off guard. The female zombie blinked in confusion before answering in a raspy, gravelly voice that she had simply come out to look for some blood. Zai mocked the idea, asking if she expected to find a puddle of blood just lying on the sidewalk. It was, quite frankly, the most ridiculous thing he'd heard. She clarified that she wasn't looking for a puddle, but for a person. Zai's temper flared instantly, confirming his suspicion that she was up to no good. He accused her of hunting humans and declared that she was now officially under arrest. He told her to surrender quietly and come with him to the authorities. Otherwise, he would be forced to execute her on the spot. Of course, he noted that she did have one single chance to atone for her crimes. He suggested she lead him to her tomb and hand over all the treasures hidden inside. If she did that, he might consider a more lenient punishment. The female zombie was stunned, claiming she didn't actually harm people. Zai found this absurd. How could someone hunting for blood claim to be innocent? The female zombie struggled to explain that she only took a little blood whenever she met someone, insisting she never actually took a life. As she spoke, she pulled out a syringe, a rather thick one with bloodstains on it, suggesting this certainly wasn't her first time using it. Zai was utterly shocked, asking if she really used that contraption instead of biting people. She simply nodded, as if it were perfectly normal. She argued that this way, no one died, and even if the authorities caught her, she could talk her way out of it. Zai's eyes widened in disbelief at her logic. It was a classic case of finding a loophole, but in his eyes, it was still completely unacceptable. He asked her if the victims actually consented to having their blood drawn, and then pointed out another glaring issue. How long had it been since she changed that needle? He continued his lecture, questioning if she could guarantee their safety or if she'd take responsibility if someone caught a disease from her dirty syringe. These were valid concerns. After all, just because she found a clever way to skirt the rules didn't mean she could ignore the consequences. The zombie looked at her syringe and admitted she couldn't afford a new one. To Zai, that was proof enough that she was still breaking the law. When she asked what he wanted, Zai reminded her of his earlier demand: lead him to the tomb, hand over the treasures, and then surrender. She couldn't see the benefit of giving up her treasures if she was going to jail anyway, but Zai assured her there was a very big difference. If she cooperated, she wouldn't get beaten. If she didn't, well, things would get painful. The zombie sneered, asking why she should feel threatened. She refused to lead him to her tomb or go to jail, confident she could take him in a fight. Zai just gave a dark, knowing smile. 1 minute later, Zai was putting his watermelon knife away while the zombie scrambled up from the ground, suddenly very polite and ready to lead the way. A quick lesson in humility had made her much more cooperative, and she began leading our group toward her burial site with newfound enthusiasm. Dressed in Qing Dynasty robes, she was clearly from that era. While items from that period aren't always the most valuable, Zai figured it was worth a look. They soon followed her into the suburban mountains. At night, these woods were crawling with all sorts of spirits and monsters. It was a dangerous place for most, but Zai wasn't afraid in the slightest, and naturally, his fox and weasel companions felt right at home. Deep in the mountains, the zombies stopped at a spot with excellent feng shui and led them toward a specific opening. It was a tunnel, one clearly left behind by grave robbers who had been there long before them. Inside the coffin, we find a collection of gold and silver jewelry, just as she had promised. The female zombie spoke up cautiously, asking if things were really that simple. Zai, however, wasn't feeling quite so relaxed. He reminded her that she drew blood without consent using an unhygienic syringe. A simple fine wouldn't just make the problem disappear. When she asked what else he wanted, he explained that turning her into the police would net him another 10,000 yuan. He wanted to prevent her from harming others, but she wasn't fooled. She accused him of just wanting her burial treasures and the bounty. She called him a bandit in a fit of rage. Zai just stared her down, asking what she meant by such a label. He joked that he was a Han bandit, though there wasn't much difference. He told her to stop talking and keep moving. The zombie asked how much the bounty was. When he said 10,000, she pulled out a piece of gold and asked if that was enough to settle it. She was essentially trying to buy her freedom. Zai thought it over for a moment and said there would be conditions. The first rule was that she couldn't just go around drawing blood from strangers. The zombie was confused, wondering what she would drink instead. Zai pointed out that no one owed her their blood. She tried to argue that she didn't owe him anything either, but then she stopped herself. She sensed the sudden danger in the air and immediately changed her tone, asking for a better suggestion. He suggested she use her money to buy medical waste blood from a hospital, noting that her current lifestyle was simply unsustainable. He pointed to little Huxian, noting that even though she was a spirit, she was self-sufficient and earned hundreds a day at her shop. Huxian blushed and lowered her head at the praise, while the zombie listened to Zai's lecture with a conflicted expression. The zombie asked if there was anything else she could do, but after thinking for a long time, she simply shook her head. Zai sighed, realizing she truly didn't have any other skills to offer. That was when the weasel finally spoke up. The weasel suggested letting her work for Zai. Zai snapped back, reminding the weasel that he hadn't even fully decided to keep him yet. He asked what use a zombie would be. Was she going to draw blood? His house wasn't exactly a hospital after all. The weasel argued that everyone has value. If Huxian could run a shop, then surely anything was possible. The weasel's words actually sparked a realization in Zai. If he was going to be a bandit, he might as well expand his influence. Making money would certainly be easier that way. With a sudden smile, his attitude toward the female zombie shifted completely. He took the gold from her hand and told her that she wasn't entirely useless. In fact, she could work for him. He offered her a salary to be his subordinate, helping with robberies and other tasks, though he had broader plans in mind. He imagined expanding into shops or factories where she could work. With his current savings, he felt quite confident making such offers. While hunting monsters for bounties was lucrative, he knew that long-term wealth usually came from running a proper business. If he ever opened a factory, he figured a zombie would make a tireless employee. As he thought this, a grander vision for the future began to take shape. The zombie, practical as ever, asked exactly how much she would be paid. So I told her they would settle the details later. He promised her at least a few thousand yuan a month, which she immediately calculated in terms of how much blood that could buy at a hospital. After a brief silence, the zombie agreed to the deal. Zai nodded, quite satisfied with his growing recruitment efforts. And so, our group set off back toward the city, Zai leading his 2 new supernatural subordinates and his little admirer, Huxian. We returned to the city streets, where Zai's sharp eyes suddenly caught sight of something suspicious near a pond. A water ghost was attempting to drag a young girl into the depths. To Zai, this wasn't just a crisis, it was a business opportunity. He charged forward, shouting for the ghost to let the girl go. He had been feeling frustrated by his recent run of luck. The last 3 supernatural beings he encountered hadn't committed crimes serious enough to turn in for a bounty. Instead of a payday, he had ended up having to adopt the weasel and the zombie as his own employees. But here was a ghost caught in the act of harming someone. There was no way he was going to let this chance slip by. Startled by his roar, the female ghost turned to see a handsome man rushing at her with a watermelon knife in hand. She froze for a second before snapping back, snarling at him to mind his own business and get lost. She was furious that he was interrupting her attempt to find a soul to take her place in the water. Zai didn't care if she vanished into thin air. He simply shouted that instead of finding a replacement soul, she was going to jail. He accelerated his charge, and the female ghost, clearly feeling a murderous intent of her own, prepared to strike back. We see her half climb out of the water before lunging directly at him, fueled by a very specific thought. She assumed a mere human with a knife was seeking death until she got a better look at what was behind him. Following closely were three distinct figures: a hopping zombie, a weasel walking upright like a man, and a young girl with fox ears. This bizarre entourage, naturally, made Zai look far more terrifying than a normal human. The ghost was clever enough to realize this wasn't a simple situation, and it wasn't just the man with the watermelon knife. Between the zombie, the fox girl, and the weasel, she knew this was a fight she absolutely could not win alone. She might be a ghost, but she had never dealt with zombies or monsters before, so she turned to flee back toward the water. Seeing her attempt to escape, Zai refused to give her the chance, picking up speed while channeling his spiritual energy. He poured that energy into his knife and swung with all his might, sending a faint blade of light slicing through the air. The light struck toward the ghost's back, and only then did she realize Zai was a true cultivator, which, honestly, was a bit late. She frantically turned to block with a burst of ghostly energy, but the impact still sent a violent tremor through her soul. She slammed hard onto the ground by the pond, her eyes darting toward the terrified girl lying nearby. In a desperate act of spite, she grabbed the girl's leg and tried to drag her into the depths to finish the job. Zai leaped forward with everything he had, catching the girl's hand just as she was about to disappear into the water. He shouted for her to hold on tight and not let go. The girl, still in her school uniform, was absolutely paralyzed with fear. Despite her terror, she listened to him and gripped his left hand with all the strength she could muster. The ghost, now back in her element as a water spirit, felt her power surge as she glared up at Zai from the surface. She pulled on the girl's leg with vicious force, causing the poor student to scream out in sudden, agonizing pain. Zai frowned as he felt the immense pressure, but he had no intention of letting go, knowing the girl would be dragged under instantly. If she fell in now, she would surely die. Realizing this, he shouted to the zombie, the fox girl, and the weasel to stop standing around. He urged them to help save her, and the fox girl was the first to react, using her long, slender legs to leap forward with incredible force. She soared through the air, performed a mid-air flip to land beside Zai, and with a wave of her hand, unleashed a blast of red demonic energy. The energy struck the water with a heavy thud, yet the ghost moved with unnatural speed beneath the surface, her claws locked onto the girl's leg. She didn't care if she killed the girl in the process. As long as she died in the water, she would still serve as a replacement soul. At that moment, the weasel stepped up, her claws extending into long, sharp blades with a single flick of her paw. She lashed out at the water spirit, who dodged again, letting out a wicked laugh while claiming that underwater, she was truly invincible. She boasted that they couldn't touch her, but then the female zombie hopped over and reached out with her own powerful claws. The zombie took hold of the girl's hand, signaling for Zai to go deal with the ghost while she held the student secure. Zai nodded in agreement. Without hesitation, he dove into the water, knife in hand, challenging her claim of invincibility as he lunged forward to test her strength. The water spirit was genuinely shocked that he was bold enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to fight a ghost in her own watery domain. Zai swung his blade directly at the ghost's hand. Having felt the weapon's power before, she didn't dare risk it and was forced to let go. The moment she released her grip, the zombie pulled with all her might, dragging the girl safely out of the water. The ghost was instantly enraged. She prepared to trap Zai beneath the surface, but he showed no fear, swinging his watermelon knife as if ready to fight to the very death. Seeing his fierce momentum, the ghost grew cautious, feeling a flicker of genuine intimidation. However, after a few swings, Zai suddenly turned around. In a few quick movements, he scrambled out of the pond and back onto dry land, leaving the water spirit completely bewildered by his sudden retreat. Once on shore, he stretched his arms, muttering about how exhausting it was to move underwater before calling the ghost a fool for thinking he'd stay there. He told her he wasn't crazy enough to fight her in the deep and gave her one chance to come out. The ghost, now furious, asked if he thought she was the stupid one. She refused to leave the water, challenging him to do something about it. Zai's eyes narrowed as he prepared to show her exactly what he could do. Zai turned to the female zombie and told her to follow him home to fetch the water pump, determined to see what he could do to the ghost tonight. Ignoring the water spirit for the moment, he instructed the fox girl and the weasel to keep a close eye on the pond while he was gone. We see him depart with the zombie, and when they finally return, she is carrying a heavy piece of machinery in her arms. Despite the pump weighing dozens of pounds, the zombie hopped along without the slightest effort, arriving back at the edge of the water. The water spirit still didn't realize the gravity of the situation, watching with confusion as the zombie set down the strange iron contraption. She continued her mockery, asking Zai if he really dared to return and what he possibly hoped to achieve. She laughed, challenging him to come back into the water to see if he could actually do anything to her this time. Zai let out a cold laugh, warning the ghost that whether one is human or spirit, it's never wise to be so arrogant that you block your own path. The ghost laughed hysterically, mocking him for trying to lecture her from the safety of the dry land. She taunted him, asking if he was angry and if he desperately wanted to scatter her soul to the winds. Knowing she believed he was powerless, Zai wasted no more words and began setting up the pump, dropping the intake pipe into the pond. He directed the outlet toward the large lawn nearby. Since the pond was small, the soil would easily absorb all the water he pumped out. Once everything was ready, he started the diesel engine, and the machine roared to life with a powerful mechanical growl. The pump was incredibly efficient, and the ghost was instantly stunned, having never expected such an unconventional and slightly absurd tactic. The atmosphere grew heavy as the ghost watched the machine work. After about half an hour, the results were undeniable. The water level dropped sharply, leaving the ghost crouching in a pool that barely covered half of her body. Just 20 minutes later, the pond was nearly empty, with only a small puddle remaining right where the ghost was standing. Under the ghost's bewildered gaze, Zai moved the pipe directly to her feet, sucking up every last drop of moisture. To be perfectly honest, he went a bit far, even bringing out a mop to dry the very spot where she stood as she watched him in shock. It was a ruthless move that left her no escape, and the ghost was finally starting to regret ever crossing him. We see Zai turn his gaze toward the ghost, who begins to speak with a trembling voice. As she speaks, her expression betrays a growing sense of total mental collapse while he watches her. She tells him that her voice was merely a bit loud before, admitting she was perhaps a little immature. She begs him not to take offense and offers a desperate apology, but Zai simply tells her it's too late. He is genuinely furious now. He grabs the ghost by her hair, pins her down, and gathers spiritual energy. With a loud shout, he begins raining down punches the size of sandbags onto the ghost's body. By now, the ghost's spirit is so utterly broken that she doesn't even have the confidence to resist him. Only her screams remain, a sight that leaves the weasel shocked and the female zombie shaking her head. They both realize just how terrifying Zai can be. Eventually, the ghost beneath him stops screaming entirely. He finally releases her, tossing her aside before pulling out his phone to call Jinya at Chuanchi Road. He tells Jinya to come over because a water ghost is harming people. Meanwhile, the ghost slowly crawls up. She looks at him with eyes full of fear, despair, and disbelief until a police car finally arrives. Jinya runs over with two spiritual officers, greeting Zai with deep respect, though he looks quite surprised. He notices the weasel and the zombie, asking who they are and which one is the water ghost. Zai explains that the weasel and zombie are with him, then points out the water ghost and the victim. The young girl immediately speaks up, confirming that the ghost tried to drag her into the depths. Jinya looks around the dry area in complete confusion, asking where exactly the water is supposed to be. Hearing the word water, the ghost begins to laugh hysterically, crying out that he pumped it all away. Jinya frowns at the babbling, broken spirit and asks what happened to her, but she only begs for water. She claims her water is gone and asks Jinya with a crazed smile if he has any to give her. The water ghost stumbles toward Jinya, who doesn't miss a beat as he pulls out handcuffs and snaps them onto her wrists. Before long, the babbling ghost is hauled into the police car, and Jinya hands over a reward while calling Zai a true master. He remarks that the ghost seems to have lost her mind, leaving Zai speechless. Honestly, he wondered if ghosts these days simply lacked mental fortitude. After accepting the reward and exchanging a few words with Jinya, the officer departs, leaving Zai to turn his attention toward the female zombie. He was actually quite satisfied with her performance tonight, and so he decided it was time to speak his mind. The weasel is visibly excited while the fox spirit is happy for her. Zai reminds them that the core principle of working with him is simple. It's all about making money, because in this era, cash is king and their primary goal is to turn a profit. The weasel and the zombie nod in agreement. The zombie, in particular, knows all too well that she needs money to buy blood. Without money, she has nothing to drink, so she speaks up and tells him that if every night is this easy, she has no objections. Zai smiles with satisfaction at her high level of awareness and decides that they have done enough for one night. He tells them it's time to head back, leading the female zombie and the weasel toward his own residence. The fox spirit has her own place and doesn't join them. Once they arrive home, we see Zai begin to make some space. He clears out a wardrobe for the zombie, who insists she doesn't need to lie down. A single shelf to stand on is perfectly sufficient. At that moment, the weasel approaches and asks about the spirit shrines I promised to set up for him. He explains it just needs a small table, an incense burner, and a piece of paper on the wall marking his divine position. Zai asks why he doesn't just do it himself if it's so simple, which leaves the weasel completely stunned by the suggestion. The weasel argues that he's never heard of a spirit immortal setting up their own shrine, but Zai isn't interested in tradition. He tells the weasel he can be the first to do it, noting that letting him stay there is already enough without having to wait on him. Left with no choice, the weasel finds a small table, sticks a paper on the wall, and pulls out a ballpoint pen. He scribbles out a title for the second elder of East Mountain, while Zai ignores him and heads straight to bed. After finishing his own spirit shrine, the weasel looks at his handiwork with a satisfied smile, though, to be honest, there is a certain tragic air about it. He is, after all, likely the first spirit immortal in history to have to set up his own altar. Thinking of this, he blinks his large eyes in contemplation. He wonders if it even counts when you do it yourself, but concludes that, regardless of the protocol, at least the shrine now exists. The weasel eventually settles into rest, but the female zombie finds herself utterly bored as the night stretches on. Since zombies are naturally nocturnal, she soon finds it impossible to stay still and quietly slips out of the house. We see her wandering the streets looking for something to do, when suddenly, she spots a ghost lingering near a row of houses. The ghost is drifting from door to door, and curious about his intentions, the female zombie hops over to get a closer look. She overhears him pointing at the doors and muttering a nursery rhyme about hunting tigers, trying to decide which house to pick. He finally settles on one with a sinister chuckle, preparing to knock, which is exactly when the zombie decides to intervene. She asks him what he's doing, giving the ghost a massive fright. He spins around, only to be even more terrified to see a zombie standing there. The ghost asks why she's scaring him, explaining that he is a knocking ghost, simply trying to do his job. He admits he suffers from severe indecision and has been wandering the street for an hour just trying to pick a victim. The zombie's eyes light up at this, realizing she's found a perfect gift for Zai, and she offers to lead him to the best house in town. The knocking ghost happily follows her back to Zai's place and, without a moment's hesitation, begins pounding on the door. Before long, an annoyed Zai flings the door open, cursing at whoever is disturbing his sleep at such an ungodly hour. His sudden outburst of temper completely stuns the ghost, while the female zombie stands behind him, watching the scene unfold. The ghost tries to regain his composure, telling Zai that his luck has run out because he has been chosen as the next victim. He puts on his most ferocious face, but Zai quickly realizes the zombie brought this guest home on purpose and breaks into a wide grin. Zai acts delighted at the prospect of being killed, warmly inviting the ghost inside, which leaves the spirit completely bewildered. The ghost feels something is wrong with this hospitality, but Zai insists he come in, noting how rare it is to have a ghost visit. Zai urges the knocking ghost to step inside, and the spirit enters the house in a daze, wondering how this man can know he is a ghost. He wonders if Zai thinks he is just a prankster and is playing along, so he decides to emphasize his true nature. He insists that he really is a ghost, telling Zai to watch closely as he spins his head a full 360 degrees on his neck. He expects this proof of his identity to finally cause a fright, but instead, Zai immediately begins to applaud, praising the performance. The knocking ghost is now more bewildered than ever. As he fully enters the room, the female zombie follows close behind him. She shuts the door and stands firmly in front of it, leaving the ghost to look back in confusion, unsure why she is blocking his exit. This makes the already nervous spirit feel even more overwhelmed, but Zai simply pulls out a stool and invites him to sit down. The ghost has completely forgotten he came here to cause harm, and before he can react, he sees a weasel walking upright like a man. The weasel carries a cup of tea in his paws, places it on the table, and politely tells the ghost to enjoy his drink. The ghost's eyes bulge as he lets out a terrified cry, shouting that the weasel can talk and calling him a monster, which is quite ironic, really. Instead of scaring the residents, the ghost finds himself the one being terrified, pale, and trembling. He stands up to flee, only to find the zombie blocking his path. He begins to panic as the gravity of the situation sets in, realizing deep down that he has likely fallen into a very clever trap. It dawns on him that the female zombie, the man in the house, and the weasel monster are all working together. He nervously asks what they want, but Zai tells him to relax and asks for more details about his specific line of work. The ghost explains that if someone opens the door, they die, and if they don't open it, they die anyway, prompting Zai to ask if he's ever actually succeeded. When the ghost confirms he has indeed killed before, Zai says he is relieved, leaving the spirit to wonder what on earth there is to be relieved about. The ghost tries to excuse himself, but Zai chuckles, knowing full well that once you enter a den of bandits, leaving isn't quite so simple. Zai tells him not to be in such a hurry and invites him to demonstrate his deadly methods right then and there. The ghost is stunned, stammering that while Zai might want to be harmed, he no longer has any desire to do the harming. Realizing the situation has turned completely against him, the knocking ghost turns toward the door, desperate to make his escape. The female zombie guarding the entrance bares her teeth at the knocking ghost, telling him to go back and do his worst to her master. The ghost is on the verge of a breakdown. He looks at Zai in utter despair, wondering what kind of madness he has stumbled into. Zai, growing a bit impatient with the delay, tells him to stop stalling and just get on with the haunting already. The ghost asks for clarification, hoping that if he simply attacks, he'll be allowed to leave, and Zai enthusiastically agrees. Seeing no other way out, the knocking ghost finally compromises. He gathers his courage, condenses his ghostly energy, and lunges forward with a shout. He screams that he'll kill Zai, aiming a blast of dark energy directly at his chest, but just as he's about to strike, the ghost's survival instincts kick in and he holds back, using only a tiny fraction of his power as his claws move slowly and gently. He taps Zai's chest so lightly that it only feels like a faint chill, but for Zai's purposes, that is quite enough. Even though the ghost was clever enough to be cautious, this single act gives Zai all the excuse he needs to make a scene. Suddenly, as if struck by a massive blow, Zai falls back dramatically and shouts at the top of his lungs that the evil ghost is a murderer. He immediately barks an order to the zombie and the weasel to take the ghost down, which, to be honest, we all saw coming. The knocking ghost realizes he needs to vanish instantly, knowing that if he stays a moment longer, heaven only knows what will happen. He transforms into a trail of ghostly mist to fly away, but the female zombie is too quick, swinging her claws to release a wave of corpse energy. The strike hits him directly, forcing him back into his physical form. Seeing his escape blocked, the ghost lets out a furious roar. Thick ghostly energy swirls around him, manifesting into a swarm of skulls that fly straight towards Zai in a desperate attack. He's trying to take out the leader first, but as Zai prepares to defend himself, the weasel leaps forward with his paws swinging. A faint demonic aura shatters the skulls instantly, and Zai gives a dark chuckle as he draws his watermelon knife with a loud shout. He declares that this ghost has harmed far too many people and that today, he will deliver justice, while the ghost watches him charge with the blade. The ghost waves his hands frantically, sending out waves of intense energy, but Zai shreds through them with a few quick swings of his knife. Having torn through the defenses, Zai is now right in front of the knocking ghost, bringing the watermelon knife down in a decisive strike. The knocking ghost rushes to defend himself, but Zai suddenly pulls back his blade and delivers a heavy kick to the ghost's lower body, leaving him utterly dazed. This was certainly not following the usual script. As Zai swings the watermelon knife again, the ghost tries to block, only to see Zai's foot move once more. The ghost sneers inwardly, deciding to ignore the blade and focus entirely on blocking the expected kick, but this time, the kick never comes. Instead, the blade falls true, sending the ghost flying. As he hits the ground, he's nearly in tears, wondering what kind of person fights like this. Scrambling back to his feet, the knocking ghost gives up on fighting Zai and focuses his efforts on the female zombie, desperately trying to reach the door. Seeing him charge again, the female zombie stands her ground at the entrance, her body erupting with corpse energy as the ghost draws near. She takes the initiative, swinging her arms to unleash waves of energy that force the knocking ghost to keep his distance. In an instant, his chance to escape through the door vanishes, and he sees Zai and the weasel closing in from behind. Panic begins to set in for our ghostly friend. He can't run, he can't win the fight, and he's running out of options fast. The knocking ghost is at a complete loss for what to do until, in a moment of pure desperation, he suddenly drops to his knees, a sight that leaves even Zai stunned. Zai watches, confused by the sudden surrender, as the ghost begs for mercy, asking what he could have possibly done to deserve this. He pleads for Zai to be the bigger person and let him go, claiming he has no memory of ever offending him in the past. Zai simply smiles and reminds him that he did, in fact, just try to kill him, and with that, he decides he's heard quite enough. He produces a red rope, smears a bit of his own blood onto it, and proceeds to tie the knocking ghost up securely. After that, he calls Jinya, telling her he's caught a dangerous ghost responsible for many victims and asking her to come pick him up at his house. By now, the ghost's mind seems to be fraying. He looks at Zai in disbelief, realizing that the authorities have been called. He mutters that this wasn't just a setup, but a full-blown sting operation, and soon enough, Jinya arrives with several spirit police officers. She recognizes the ghost immediately, confirming he's been linked to several incidents, and orders her team to take him to the car. The knocking ghost struggles and screams like a madman, but he cannot escape his fate as he is locked inside the police vehicle. Jinya hands Zai a 10,000 yuan reward, offers a few words of praise, and departs, leaving us to wait for the following day at noon. We return to Zai, who wakes up and immediately begins pondering how to earn more money, realizing that hunting ghosts for bounties isn't enough. To be honest, relying on rewards isn't a long-term plan, especially now that he has a weasel and a female zombie as subordinates. It felt like a waste of resources to do nothing big, but just as he was struggling for ideas, Su Imoer called him. Upon answering, he heard Imoer explain that after her recent kidnapping by a ghost, she had a massive falling out with her father. She had run away from home, determined to build her own career without his help, and she had a proposition for our protagonist. She asked if he wanted to join her, but Zai simply laughed, knowing she was a wealthy heiress while he actually needed to earn a living. He told her to stop playing around, but she insisted she was serious about working hard and making something of herself. Since her father started with a factory, she planned to do the same, though she had no idea what kind of factory to open. She asked for his advice. At first, he intended to just hang up, but then a rather interesting thought occurred to him. He suggested opening a garment factory, an idea that suddenly sparked in his mind during the heat of the moment. Imagine the scene. Instead of handing evil spirits over to the police for a small bounty, he could force them to work for him. He wouldn't even have to pay them, and once their value was depleted, he could still turn them in for the final reward money. He could even recruit ordinary ghosts to work for him and pay them in spirit money, which, as we know, costs almost nothing. His eyes began to glow with greed at the prospect of such a profitable venture. After all, he was a man of practical ambition. If he truly wanted to make a fortune, he realized he needed to squeeze every bit of value out of these supernatural beings. On the other end of the line, Emoer sounded excited, thinking a clothing factory was actually a fantastic idea. She wanted to start organizing it immediately, but Zai told her to wait, deciding he should handle this particular project alone. He explained that the factory he had in mind was likely very different from what she was imagining, as it wouldn't hire any humans. Instead of machines or people, he planned to use ghosts and demons for labor, chuckling to himself as he hung up the phone. Emoer had certainly provided the inspiration he needed. He realized that to get truly rich, he had to stop being a hunter and start being a boss. With over 600,000 in his pocket, opening a factory seemed like a simple task, so Zai immediately headed out. He managed to rent a small workshop right above his apartment for only a few tens of thousands a year. Once the deal was done, he began purchasing imitation cutting and sewing machines, figuring that making clothes, turning thread into fabric and stitching it couldn't be that hard. At least, that was his logic. As for the technical details, he decided he would simply cross that bridge when he got to it. He bought about 10 machines at the market for less than 100,000 and had them moved directly into his new factory. After stocking up on plenty of thread, all his tools were ready, and he returned home just as the sky was beginning to darken. As luck would have it, the Fox Immortal sister arrived carrying 2 roasted chickens, greeting Zai and the weasel with a bright smile. She called out to her big brother and second brother Huang, and Zai, never one to be polite, immediately started eating. Once he was full and satisfied, he turned to the weasel and the female zombie to announce he had opened a garment factory upstairs. Explaining that he needed a workforce, he gave them a mission. They were to head out into the streets and find any troublemaking spirits. Any evil entity they found was to be tied up and brought to the factory, though they could also recruit ordinary ghosts for the job. He clarified that the wages would be paid in spirit money, and both the zombie and the weasel nodded, fully understanding the plan. However, the weasel quickly asked what they should do if they encountered a monster they couldn't defeat. Then call me, Zai replied. The Fox Immortal sister then asked if she could join as a part-timer, which surprised Zai since she already owned a roast chicken shop. She explained that she wanted to buy a house in the city, but having only saved a few tens of thousands, she had a long way to go. Hearing her struggle felt a bit heart-wrenching, so Zai readily agreed to let her join the team. It was a fair deal after all. He told her to help the others capture criminal spirits and recruit law-abiding ones, promising them all a steady salary. He offered them a base pay of 3,000 a month, which made the Fox sisters' eyes light up and left the weasel incredibly excited. The weasel hadn't expected to actually earn a wage, while the female zombie simply wondered how much blood 3,000 could buy. Soon, this unlikely group of 1 human, 2 spirits, and a zombie began patrolling the streets of Haicheng, eventually reaching a quiet park. We see a few evil spirits swaggering about, discussing how best to prank humans when one of them addresses their leader. He suggests they stop harming people for a while, having heard rumors of a bandit in Haicheng who specializes in catching ghosts. The leader, a particularly crude and ugly spirit, simply snorts and asks what would even happen if they were caught. Another ghost explains that they'd be sent to prison, but the leader just laughs, thinking a prison sentence is nothing to fear. He laughs heartily at the idea, which, naturally, is the exact moment a voice rings out from the shadows nearby. The voice asks who said they wouldn't have to work the assembly lines. Zai has arrived just as they were speaking of him. The ghosts look at him in confusion as he approaches, the leader remarking that he's quite bold for a mere human. They were just looking for a victim, and here one is. The other 2 ghosts join in with sinister, dark laughter. Zai walks closer and asks what they're doing, whether they want to harm people or if they're just looking for a jail cell. The leader is puzzled, asking if Zai even realizes they are ghosts, but Zai just scoffs at the obvious question. He tells them that if he didn't know they were ghosts, he wouldn't have come looking for them in the first place. The spirits find him incredibly arrogant. The leader declares that if they don't kill him now, their reputation will be ruined. The 3 of them float toward him at once, and seeing them make the first move, Zai reaches behind his waist. He slowly draws his watermelon knife, and the moment the 3 ghosts see the blade, their expressions shift instantly. They clearly realize who he is, and seeing the rather unsettling smile on Zai's face, their suspicions are finally confirmed. They screech to a halt, realizing he is the infamous bandit, but Zai tells them it's far too late for regrets. He raises the knife and swings it fiercely at the trio, prompting the leader to scream for a desperate retreat. As the leader turns to flee, Zai chuckles and throws the watermelon knife directly at the escaping spirit. The blade flies through the air and sinks into the leader's shoulder with a thud, drawing a scream of pure agony. The spirit collapses, and Zai steps forward to pin him down, pulling the knife back out with one swift motion. Then he turns his gaze toward the other 2 evil spirits, who are so terrified they immediately try to flee while Zai gives chase. Catching up to one, he swings his blade, causing the ghost to drop to its knees in terror, begging him not to strike. Zai simply kicks the spirit to the ground and looks back to see the third ghost has already drifted quite a distance away. Letting out a series of strange, mocking laughs, he pursues the runner, and despite the head start, Zai is much faster. As he closes the gap, he swings the watermelon knife, making the ghost's pale face turn even whiter as Zai asks if it's still running. He asks if the spirit isn't afraid of being killed. Hearing this, the ghost freezes in fear and looks back just in time to see it. The watermelon knife comes slashing down, and after a scream of pain, Zai begins dragging the spirit back by its feet. Looking at the injured leader and the other ghost pinned to the ground, the trio is trembling with a fear they can't quite explain. They have encountered many monks and exorcists before, but deep down, they feel this man is far more terrifying than any of them. Soon, Zai pulls out some red string to bind the three ghosts and brings them directly to the factory, where they stare at the machinery. They are completely bewildered, and the leader asks if they aren't being sent to the police for a reward, which, apparently, is old news. Zai informs them that from now on, they will be working for him, prompting one ghost to immediately ask why. He tells them it's because they owe him money, leaving the spirits shocked since they can't recall ever borrowing a cent. He explains that their attempt to harm him caused his fragile soul great trauma, and since they can't pay for the damages, they must work. The three spirits are stunned by the sheer audacity, and the leader finally roars out in frustration. He demands to know who really traumatized him and who should actually be paying for the mental distress. Zai simply strokes the edge of his watermelon knife and asks if they have an objection, which, naturally, changes the leader's mind instantly. The leader quickly sits at a machine and eagerly asks Zai to teach him the operation, claiming he can't wait to start working. The other two ghosts are shocked once more, but Zai just sneers, noting that working is much better than being beaten. He looks at the remaining two, who quickly rush over to join their leader, very sincerely asking for instructions on how to operate the machines. Zai nods with satisfaction, noting that their awareness is quite high, and begins teaching them how to operate the machinery. One evil spirit is assigned to weaving, another to cutting, and the leader to sewing, creating a perfectly functional assembly line. He gives them a short-sleeved sample to copy, and then simply leaves. Once he's gone, the three ghosts exchange looks. The leader, Humii, whispers for them to wait until Zai is further away before they make their escape. A clever plan, indeed. The others praise his brilliance, mocking Zai for being strong but foolish, and prepare to retreat immediately. But just as they are about to bolt, we see Zai walk back in carrying an axe, staring directly at the three runners. He asks what they think they're doing, leaving the trio feeling incredibly awkward and nervous as they stammer for an answer. They claim they just wanted to open a window for some fresh air, as it felt a bit suffocating in there. Zai notes that with three ghosts inside, the factory is colder than an air conditioner, so their excuse about the heat is quite thin. He tells them not to lie to him. He may not be a scholar, but he certainly isn't a fool either. Choosing not to expose them further, he gives a cold laugh and orders them back to work, sending them scurrying to their stations. They begin operating the machines clumsily, while Zai takes a stack of prepared talismans and begins his real work. He plasters them on every window, wall, door, ceiling, and floor, ensuring no ghost can simply phase through the walls and leave. Now, they can't even open the doors or approach the windows without being repelled by the spiritual energy. Seeing every possible escape route cut off, the three spirits look even paler and more miserable than the day they died. Humii grumbles about how ruthless this is, while Zai claps his hands together, quite pleased with his handiwork. He tells them to work hard so he can send them to the spirit police station sooner, which leaves the ghosts utterly stunned. The implication is clear. Even after all this labor, they are still going to jail, a case of pure exploitation, to be honest. However, they dare not say a word and can only watch in silence as he smiles and finally departs. Once the door is shut and they are certain he is truly gone, Humii immediately stands up once again. After circling the factory floor with the other two, they finally realize with utter despair that there truly is no way out. The others ask Humii what to do, insisting they can't actually work here. After all, they are supposed to be fearsome evil spirits. They worry about their reputation, but Humii simply asks if they have a better plan, leaving the two ghosts speechless. In this situation, escape is clearly impossible. If it were anyone else, they might have stood a fighting chance. But this man is a different breed, a ruthless force who once leveled the entire Dongshan cemetery in a single night. He cut down hundreds of souls with a single blade. Having seen how twisted he is, they know better than to resist. Hearing Humii's grim assessment, the other two completely lose their nerve and ask their leader for their next move. With no other choice, Humii tells them to get to work and begins operating the machinery to weave the fabric. The other two sigh in resignation, with one starting to cut the cloth while the other begins sewing the short-sleeved shirts. And believe it or not, after a bit of frantic effort, the three ghosts actually manage to finish their first garment. Meanwhile, seeing that ghost labor is actually viable, Zai begins planning to use his remaining cash to buy more machinery. However, after doing the math, he realizes that the new equipment would essentially drain his entire bank account. He decides he needs to scrounge up a few tens of thousands more, fearing his capital will be too tight otherwise. Since the weasel, the female zombie, and the fox spirit are out recruiting, Zai considers his options carefully. He decides to send a few more ghosts to jail to collect the bounties, so he heads out to find some spirits up to no good. After a long search with no luck, we see him arrive at the same incense and candle shop where he previously shopped. As luck would have it, 4 ghosts arrive at the shop at that very moment, and Zai watches curiously to see their intent. He observes quietly from a distance as the 4 spirits linger outside the shop, seemingly working up their courage. They approach the entrance together, and a yellow-haired ghost demands that the owner burn 4 stacks of spirit money for them. The short-haired shopkeeper quotes a price of $40, but they insist she burn it first before they hand over any cash. The short-haired girl brings out 4 stacks of spirit money and begins burning them in the brazier outside, as the yellow-haired ghost steps forward eagerly. He snatches the burning currency from the flames and asks her to remind him of the price. $40 for the 4 stacks, she replies calmly. The yellow-haired ghost nods, but instead of real cash, he pulls a single 100,000 yuan spirit note from the stack and hands it to her. He tells her to keep the change with a smug, careless grin, leaving the young shopkeeper standing there in a state of utter confusion. Even Zai, watching from a distance, is impressed by the sheer audacity of the move. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper, Zhou Mei, is clearly reaching her limit. She snaps at them, asking if they think she's a fool, reminding them that she expects actual currency, not the paper she just sold them. The ghost scoffs, pointing out that since they are spirits, it only makes sense for them to pay for their goods with spirit money. Zhou Mei sneers, noting they picked the wrong place for games. A woman running an incense shop all night isn't easily intimidated. With a flick of her wrist, she produces 4 spirit charms and hurls them at the group, sending the ghosts scrambling in a panic. They aren't nearly fast enough to outrun the charms, which strike them squarely in the back and send all 4 spirits flying through the air. As they hit the ground, she walks over with total composure and ignites another charm with a simple flick of her fingers. She drops the burning paper onto the stacks of spirit money held by the yellow-haired ghost, and the entire pile instantly goes up in flames. The ghost yelps and drops the money, watching in horror as his prize is reduced to a pile of worthless gray ash in seconds. She gives a cold laugh, telling them they certainly have some nerve trying to pull a fast one on her in her own shop. The 4 ghosts scramble to their feet, fuming with rage, but they realize they're no match for her and decide to make a quick exit. The yellow-haired ghost throws one last insult over his shoulder as they retreat, only for their eyes to land directly on Zai. Annoyed that Zai is staring, the yellow-haired ghost frowns and barks an order for him to come over, to which Zai simply points at himself. The ghost roars for him to get over there, and to the spirit's surprise, Zai actually complies, calmly asking what they want. The ghost is momentarily stunned by his lack of fear, but Zai just shrugs, wondering what use there would be in being afraid. The ghost asks if he's happy to have met a spirit, threatening to kill him, but Zai just smiles. That would be quite a favor, wouldn't it? Zai tells them to hurry up and kill him, as he's actually getting quite impatient. He never expected that just stopping to watch the drama would lead to this. He considers it a stroke of incredible luck to have trouble find him like this, and to be honest, the prospect is making him quite happy. Since he hadn't found any evil spirits to capture for reward money lately, he sees this as a payday walking right toward him, so he remains very polite. He is genuinely worried these 4 ghosts might change their minds, while the yellow-haired ghost stands there completely bewildered, wondering what is wrong with this man. It's one thing not to be afraid of a ghost, but it's quite another to be eager for death. Meanwhile, Zhou Mei, the shopkeeper, is also left in a state of shock. Ever since she first met Zai, she hasn't been able to figure him out, starting with the time he walked into her shop with only 5 yuan to buy a fruit knife. Then he spent tens of thousands on beginner cultivation manuals and went around picking fights, and now he is practically begging these ghosts to end him. She simply cannot wrap her head around a person like this, and while everyone is still processing the absurdity, Zai urges them again to hurry up and kill him. The yellow-haired ghost frowns, as Zai's abnormal behavior is actually making the spirit feel a bit nervous. Finally, the ghost decides to change tactics. He tells Zai that if he doesn't want to die, he must take all his money, buy spirit currency from the shop, and burn it for them immediately. Upon hearing this, Zai's face darkens. He is short on cash himself and was counting on these ghosts attacking him so he could claim a bounty. Instead of providing him with a reward, these ghosts are actually asking him to spend his own money on them, which was not the plan at all. If he weren't forbidden from striking first, he would have flattened the yellow-haired ghost's head by now. Suppressing his anger, he tells them again to just kill him. He demands to know if they heard him, but his insistence only makes the yellow-haired ghost more suspicious, prompting one of the other spirits to whisper a suggestion. The spirit suggests that Zai might be mentally ill and clearly has no money, so they should consider kidnapping him instead. When asked who would pay the ransom, the spirit suggests taking him to the neighborhood police station and demanding money from the officers there. They figure that with a hostage in hand, the police will have to comply. The yellow-haired ghost's eyes light up, impressed by the sheer audacity of the idea. The plan is to take him to the station, force the police to burn spirit money for them, and then make a quick getaway with the loot. The four ghosts huddle together and break into sinister laughter after finalizing their scheme. Then, the yellow-haired ghost barks at Zai to follow them. Zai is momentarily stunned when told they are going to the police station, wondering if they are actually planning to turn themselves in. Zai suggests they give him a good beating first and leave the rest to him, but the four ghosts just stare back with expressions as dark as storm clouds. The yellow-haired ghost admits he has no idea what Zai is talking about, but insists they are kidnapping him to demand money from the police station. Zai's eyes widen as he realizes this is exactly his own usual strategy. He begins to wonder who is actually kidnapping whom in this situation. Despite the confusion, he suddenly becomes quite excited, realizing that being kidnapped counts as a crime committed by these four spirits. Once they reach the station, everyone will witness the crime, and his bounty will be guaranteed. Luckily, the ghosts don't notice his suspicious enthusiasm. As they prepare to lead him away toward the police station, the short-haired shopkeeper, Jomei, suddenly calls out for them to wait. Zai turns around immediately, and, before the ghost can even speak, he warns her not to mind other people's business, which is a bit unusual for a victim. The yellow-haired ghost glances at him, thinking this hostage is surprisingly cooperative, while Jomei simply snorts and retreats back into her shop. She has a nagging feeling that Zai is actually the one playing these ghosts, so she stops worrying and watches as the kidnapping proceeds. And so, Zai travels toward the station feeling incredibly happy, perhaps even happier than the ghosts themselves, as they arrive at the building's exterior. Once there, the four ghosts grow a bit nervous, as the police station is responsible for local supernatural security and might pose a threat to them. They assume they are safe as long as they have a hostage, though for some reason, this particular hostage is making them feel increasingly uneasy. To be honest, they should have trusted their instincts, but they decide to push forward with the plan regardless of their growing anxiety. The yellow-haired ghost shouts toward the entrance, demanding that the officers burn 1 billion in spirit currency for them, or they will kill the hostage. A dozen officers emerge, including Jin Yi, and they all stop dead in their tracks when they recognize the man being held captive. The officers are utterly bewildered, and Jin Yi asks in total confusion what exactly is going on here, as the scene makes no sense. The ghost explains impatiently that they have kidnapped this man and will only release him if the police burn the billion in spirit money. Jin Yi pauses and asks for clarification, wondering if Zai is the one kidnapping the ghosts or if the ghosts have truly kidnapped him. The ghost snaps back, asking if they can't understand plain speech, reiterating that the four of them have clearly taken this man hostage. Jin Yi looks directly at Zai and asks if they really kidnapped him, to which Zai insists it's true, pointing out how they have him surrounded. Jin Yi still isn't buying it, looking at Zai with a skeptical eye and asking if this is just another one of his elaborate games. Zai insists he is a genuine victim of a kidnapping, while Jin Yi turns his attention back to the four ghosts to double-check. He asks if they are being threatened, which offends the ghosts, who wonder why on earth anyone would be threatening the kidnappers. When asked for proof of the crime, the yellow-haired ghost is stunned that his status as a criminal is actually being questioned. In response, the four spirits manifest their ghostly energy and grab Zai by the throat, with the leader shouting for everyone to watch. Jin Yi finally concedes that it looks like a kidnapping, and as soon as he acknowledges the crime, Zai's demeanor shifts entirely. Zai notes that since everyone has witnessed the illegal act, he is now officially cleared to take matters into his own hands. Jin Yi simply nods and heads inside to fetch the bounty money, leaving the yellow-haired ghost feeling suddenly very frantic. The ghost screams after him, confused as to why they are talking about prize money instead of paying the ransom for their hostage. We see the four ghosts standing there in utter confusion, unable to fathom why the police are simply walking away from a victim. As the officers disappear into the station, the bewildered spirits turn their gaze back towards Zai, searching for some kind of explanation. The yellow-haired ghost asks why the police don't seem to care about him, but Zai only responds with a rather unsettling smile. He explains that it isn't that the police are ignoring him, it's that they are ignoring the ghosts, which is a subtle but terrifying distinction. Zai tells them they'll understand the meaning soon enough, and before they can react, he suddenly raises his hand with lightning speed. A cleaver has appeared in his grip, and with a single swift motion, he strikes at the hands currently encircling his neck. The sudden counterattack leaves the four ghosts paralyzed with shock, their spectral claws wounded before they can even process the pain. Before they can even scream, Zai pulls out a red rope and lashes it out, expertly entangling all four spirits in a single bind. With a sharp tug, he ties them together tightly, a feat he manages to accomplish in the span of a single breath. When Jin Yi returns, he finds the situation exactly as he expected, and he hands Zai 40,000 yuan for his troubles. The ghosts still don't understand what happened as Zai hands them over to Jin Yi, who promptly has them led away to a cell. The four ghosts depart in a mixture of agony and utter confusion, their minds so thoroughly scrambled that they'll likely spend weeks in their cells. They simply cannot fathom what happened tonight. As Zai pockets the money, Jin Yi watches him with a look that is nothing if not skeptical. He tells Zai that this business model isn't sustainable, as sooner or later, every malevolent spirit in Haicheng will either be captured by him, or scared away entirely. Zai just smiles, remarking that he is already considering a career change and looking for a new way to make a living. There is no need for Zai to keep up appearances with Jin Yi, so after a brief chat, he takes his leave to wander the city. He spends the rest of the night patrolling several streets, but surprisingly, he doesn't find a single wicked ghost. Not wanting to waste more time, he heads back. Upon returning to his workshop, we see that 3 new ghosts have been added to the collection, including a female hanging ghost. She has a long red tongue, but is actually quite pretty. Beside her are a male car accident victim and a powerful female ghost in red. The red-clothed ghost looks quite arrogant, though she seems terrified of the fox immortal, who likely gave her a rough time during the capture. It seems she learned her lesson the hard way. At this moment, these 3 newcomers are standing perfectly still, watching the others work. Humiai and his 2 brothers have become quite the professionals, behaving as if they've been in the garment industry for decades. They managed to produce 10 short-sleeved shirts in a single night, and they clearly already consider themselves the master craftsmen of this shop. They operate the machines while explaining the techniques to the 3 new ghosts. Seeing this, Sai decides to offer some encouragement. He steps forward and praises them, noting that 10 shirts is an impressive start and telling them to keep up the hard work. He suggests they aim for 100 shirts a night. Humiai and his brothers immediately stand up, eager to please their employer. They thank the boss for his praise and promise to redouble their efforts. Zai nods in satisfaction, feeling quite good about his new workforce. Glancing outside, we see that dawn is approaching. Zai points toward a wooden box in the corner and tells everyone it's time to clock out. He promises to burn a paper house for them later, but for now, they'll have to make do. The 3 ghosts shut down their machines and stop working. They obediently file into the wooden box. Zai then turns his attention to the hanging ghost and the other 2 newcomers. He tells them he assumes they know why they are here, and he hopes they will spend their time wisely in the days to come. The female ghost in red stares at Zai, clearly shocked by a level of ruthlessness that seems almost inhuman, even to a spirit. He expects them to earn him a fortune here and then go to prison afterward. To be honest, it's a plan only Zai could devise. The red-clothed ghost finally speaks up, asking what happens if they refuse to work, a question Zai meets with a calm, steady gaze. She argues that they are ghosts, not factory workers, and as a powerful spirit, she clearly feels entitled to a bit of defiance. Zai takes a deep breath and asks if she has ever harmed a human, to which she replies with a boastful, wicked grin. She begins to brag about scaring a man into madness, but Zai cuts her off, demanding to know why she would do such a thing. She sneers, claiming that as a powerful ghost, she needs no reason to harm others, a statement that prompts Zai to draw his watermelon knife. The female zombie, Huang Pizzi, and the fox immortal all instinctively back away, knowing that Zai is about to lose his temper. Zai points the blade at her and declares that since he is a hunter, he doesn't need a reason to capture her either. He tells her that if he wants her to work, he doesn't need to provide a justification, leaving the ghost stunned by his logic. When she asks what will happen if she still refuses, Zai flashes a twisted smile and threatens to harvest her kidneys. He mentions handing her over to Jin Yi afterward, causing the ghost's expression to shift from arrogance to genuine confusion and fear. She asks why he would take her kidneys, and Zai simply remarks that it's what happens to disobedient workers in other places, so he'll follow suit. The car accident victim and the hanging ghost are already trembling, but the red-clothed ghost tries to grit her teeth and remain defiant. She insists she won't work, but as Zai approaches with his knife, her fierce expression begins to falter under his intense pressure. With a sudden movement, Zai strikes her down with the flat of the blade and pins her to the floor with his foot. He prepares to drive the knife into her back, feeling no sympathy for a spirit that admitted to harming innocent people for fun. Terrified for her existence, the ghost screams for him to stop, desperately promising to do whatever work he requires of her. Amidst her cries, Zai halts his blade. After all, he still needs her labor, and a damaged ghost makes for a poor employee. He sheaths his watermelon knife with a cold huff, satisfied that the hierarchy in his workshop has been firmly established. Zai tells the ghost in red to behave and work hard from now on, or she'll regret it, a threat she accepts with a frantic, terrified nod. She had always considered herself a terrifying spirit, but today, she realized she had finally met someone far more ruthless than herself. We see Zai turn his gaze toward the hanging ghost and the accident victim, the latter of whom immediately swears his undying loyalty to the boss. He claims that working for Zai will be the greatest purpose of his afterlife, while the hanging ghost quickly stammers out his agreement. Zai nods, satisfied with their sudden cooperation, and sends them to rest in the Mu River until it's time to work the night shift. He instructs the 3 Kumei ghosts to teach them the ropes, and the new recruits promptly vanish into the river's depths to prepare. Meanwhile, the female zombie finds a spot to rest in the factory, and Huang Pizzi simply curls up on a pile of fabric for a nap. The fox immortal returns to her shop, and as dawn breaks, Zai heads out to order a dozen more machines for his growing enterprise. With more ghosts expected to arrive, he knows he needs to keep up with equipment and raw materials, which, naturally, requires a significant investment. His funds are nearly depleted, but he can't help but smile at the 18 machines now filling his workshop, including 6 imitation units. With 6 cutting machines and 6 sewing machines, he has successfully established 6 complete production lines in his supernatural factory. He calculates that he'll need at least 20 supernatural workers. For now, he decides to stop buying equipment and focus on recruitment. However, a new problem arises. Where will he sell the finished clothes? Without a sales channel, all this production is essentially useless. Even though his labor costs are practically zero, ghosts don't exactly demand a minimum wage. The machinery costs are still quite high. After some careful thought, he realizes that live streaming might be the perfect way to move his inventory and avoid losing money. He decides to give it a try that very evening, and as the sun sets, the workshop begins to stir with activity once more. The Kumeai brothers and the 3 new ghosts emerge from the Mu River, ready to begin their nightly duties under Zai's watchful eye. Taking on the air of a seasoned veteran, the eldest Kumeai brother shows the newcomers the latest additions to the factory floor. He tells them to learn quickly so they can start operating the machines, asserting his dominance as a senior employee. But the ghost in red isn't entirely convinced, asking Kumeai if a powerful spirit like him is truly content spending his afterlife in a factory. The Kumeai ghost lets out a long, weary sigh, asking her what use there is in being a vicious spirit when they've already moved past that path. He explains they are just 3 ghosts who found their purpose in labor and warns her to stop dreaming about leaving this place. Operating the machines is actually quite fun, he claims, but the ghost in red simply stares back in complete disbelief. Kumeai scoffs at her skepticism, asking if she'd rather believe in the boss's ability to harvest her organs instead. The accident victim ghost chimes in, asking if she really dares to incite a rebellion and threatening to tell the boss immediately. He turns respectfully toward the eldest Kumeai brother, who nods, and begins the training session for the new recruits. As it turns out, the accident victim learns quickly, but the hanging ghost and the ghost in red are utterly hopeless, leaving Kumeai baffled. He can't understand it. Logically, whether it's the textile machines, the inspection units, or the sewing machines, it should be simple. He points out that the female ghosts are the ones struggling, while all the male ghosts have mastered the craft perfectly. He boasts that it must be a matter of natural talent, jokingly suggesting that men are gifted at everything except giving birth. Just then, we see Zai arrive at the factory after dinner, only to be met by Kumeai reporting that the 2 female ghosts can't learn the work. Kumeai acts like a seasoned floor manager, already showing the subtle cunning of a factory official as he presents the problem. The ghost in red and the hanging ghost look at Zai with pitiful, nervous eyes as he walks through the workshop with his hands behind his back. He clears his throat and decides to give them a different task, pulling out a smartphone and setting it up on a tripod. He tells the 2 ghosts that from now on, they will be responsible for online sales through a live stream to move the factory's inventory. The 2 ghosts are stunned, repeating the words live stream and sales as if they've never heard of such a thing in the afterlife. They clearly didn't expect Zai to put them in front of a camera, and for a moment, they just stand there in silence. Zai asks if there's a problem, noting that if they can't run machines or sell goods, perhaps they'd prefer the organ harvesting alternative. The ghost in red quickly agrees to the live stream, and the hanging ghost nods frantically, terrified of the other option. Zai informs them the account is ready and asks which one will host and which will model, causing the ghost in red to suddenly turn shy. The ghost in red offers to be the model, admitting that speaking to a camera during a live stream would make her far too nervous. She lowers her head in embarrassment, so Zai turns to the hanging ghost and decides she will host while the other models. The hanging ghost drags her long tongue and excitedly thanks the boss, promising to work hard despite Kumeai's skeptical grumbling. Kumeai mutters that she can barely speak clearly, but the hanging ghost has already started the stream and sat on a small stool. She stares blankly at the phone for a moment until people begin entering the room and comments start appearing on the screen. Realizing that an audience has actually gathered, the hanging ghost immediately opens her mouth to begin her pitch. Soon, the ghost in red emerges from the changing area wearing a short-sleeved shirt, a unisex design from their own production line. The shirt looks surprisingly good on her. To be honest, the ghost in red has quite an impressive figure for the camera. The viewers in the live stream chat suddenly become very excited, their comments flooding the screen with energy. Zai watches the comments and smiles, thinking these people are quite bold. He hadn't expected the 2 ghosts to be such a hit. The effect is surprisingly powerful, especially with the hanging ghost speaking in her strange, slurred voice due to her long tongue. The audience finds her peculiar way of talking fascinating, while the ghost in red continues to showcase the different shirts. They look great on her, and soon, men and women in the chat begin placing orders, quickly selling dozens of items. Zai set the price at 100 yuan per shirt, which is a bit high, but he feels the unique craftsmanship justifies it. After all, these are clothes made by ghosts, modeled by a powerful spirit, and sold by a hanging ghost host. In his mind, they are worth every penny, even if the customers have no idea about the supernatural labor involved. The public is simply drawn to the mysterious host and the beautiful model, which is more than enough to drive their curiosity. As the hanging ghost continues her muffled broadcast, the likes, gifts, and new followers begin to pour in relentlessly. The stream grows more popular by the minute, as people are captivated by these two strange, yet strikingly beautiful girls. They are equally fascinated by the eerie, industrial backdrop of the clothing production line visible behind them. Seeing such incredible results makes Zai very happy. After all, selling 100 shirts at 100 yuan each is pure profit. That is 10,000 yuan in sales in just a few minutes. But as we see, success brings its own complications. They have sold hundreds of shirts, yet the ghosts have only finished 10. He realizes he needs more workers immediately. He turns to Kumi-ai and the others, telling them the clothes are selling fast, and they must hurry to meet the demand. Upon hearing this, Kumi-ai is suddenly full of energy. She never imagined her value as a ghost would be found in tailoring. As she rushes back to work, Zai speaks to the female zombie, the weasel spirit, and the newly arrived fox immortal sister. He tells them they need to recruit many more spirits to work tonight, and the three of them quickly understand the mission. Everyone heads off in different directions to find targets, while Zai personally sets out to wander the streets once more. Most people hope for fewer evil spirits in the world, but in this moment, Zai finds himself wishing for quite the opposite. He hopes to run into as many as possible, but unfortunately, when one actually looks for a ghost, they are nowhere to be found. He decides to set his sights on ordinary ghosts instead, spotting one wandering aimlessly just a short distance ahead. This is a green-headed ghost with a faint teal glow. These spirits are usually harmless and, to be honest, a bit pitiful. Zai approaches him and calls out, "Brother," prompting the ghost to look back and ask what he wants. Zai tells him he has a great opportunity, but the ghost eyes him suspiciously, sensing something a bit shady about the offer. The ghost asks if he's trying to sell him something, but Zai insists he simply noticed the ghost's unique aura and potential. He claims he wouldn't tell just anyone, while the ghost scoffs, thinking to himself that he is obviously not an ordinary person. The green-headed ghost asks what he's getting at, and Zai explains he has a job that would be a perfect fit. The ghost laughs, pointing out the obvious fact that he is a spirit, but Zai calmly replies that's exactly why he's hiring. The ghost is baffled that someone is recruiting the dead, arguing that ghosts shouldn't have to work at all. Zai disagrees, asking the ghost a very practical question. Does he actually have any spirit money to his name? This question clearly hits a sore spot, but Zai doesn't care about his feelings and asks if he even owns a car. The green-headed ghost's expression turns sour as he admits he has no car and no house either. Zai scoffs, noting that such things are only made of paper, yet the ghost still has nothing, which is quite pathetic. These words hit the ghost like a heavy hammer to the chest, causing his spirit form to tremble as he hangs his head. Filled with shame and despair, the ghost feels he's a failure even at being dead, so Zai quickly steps in to offer hope. He tells the spirit that an opportunity to change his fate is right here, with a job waiting just for him. He offers 10 billion in spirit currency per month, a sum so large the ghost wonders if he's being tricked. To a living person, 10 billion is just a pile of cheap paper, but the ghost is stunned and asks what the work is. Zai gives a dark little laugh, telling him he'll find out soon, while insisting he doesn't look like a bad guy. To be honest, looking at Zai right now, it's hard to believe he isn't a villain, and the ghost remains deeply skeptical. Zai rolls his eyes as the ghost worries that this might be some kind of supernatural pyramid scheme. After a long and exhausting explanation, the green-headed ghost finally believes him and agrees to go to the factory. Zai sighs, thinking it's much easier to just kidnap evil spirits rather than wasting so much breath on negotiations. Evil spirits don't require wages and can be traded to Officer Lin for rewards, a much better deal, all things considered. With the ghost in tow, Zai continues wandering the streets, explaining that they are looking for even more recruits. Just as he says this, we see a female ghost in white chasing a terrified young man a short distance away. Her hair is a tangled mess covering her face, and she moves with a strange, unnatural gait that is deeply unsettling. Her joints appear to be broken, making her look quite terrifying as she pursues her prey through the night. Every few steps, she flickers and vanishes, reappearing meters ahead, keeping pace with the man despite her slow movements. The man is paralyzed with fear, and we notice he is incredibly thin, nothing more than skin and bones, really. To an outsider, she might look like a ghost herself, but seeing Zai nearby, she rushes over and screams for help. Zai's eyes light up instantly. He was just thinking about catching a harmful spirit, and here one is, committing a crime right in front of him. He is absolutely delighted as he pulls out his watermelon knife and charges forward, shouting at the female ghost in white to stop her wicked ways. He swings his blade, declaring she'll pay for harming people, but the ghost whips her long hair around with surprising force. Her hair comes alive like a giant python, lashing out at him, but Zai quickly blocks with his blade, which begins to emit a faint, mystical glow. When the edge of the knife strikes the supernatural hair, a shower of sparks erupts into the night air. Zai realizes she looks exactly like Sadako from the movies, and he mockingly asks if she's related to the famous spirit while telling her to step aside. He hadn't expected to meet a legendary figure like Sadako, so he sternly warns her that she has a lot of nerve trying to harm people in China. Sadako fumes, telling this stinking Taoist to mind his own business and move, or he'll regret it, but Zai only responds with a cold sneer. He insists on interfering anyway, then turns to the scrawny man behind him, telling him not to worry because he's here now. He notes that the man must be quite something to be hunted by Sadako herself, and curiously asks what started this whole mess. The man explains it's a long story, but it all started when he got his hands on a cursed videotape. He was watching the Sadako series when she suddenly crawled out of the television, which, naturally, terrified him beyond belief. In his sheer panic, he accidentally relieved himself all over her, and now she's determined to kill him. Zai nods, turning back to the ghost. He tells Sadako that since she started the scaring, she's technically in the wrong, and he's decided to settle this matter once and for all. Enraged by his logic, Sadako lunges at him, and Zai quickly swings his blade, engaging the spirit in a frantic supernatural duel. Although Sadako is a powerful and vengeful spirit, she is ultimately no match for a self-proclaimed genius and tough guy like Zai. After a brief struggle, she is struck twice by the watermelon knife, yet she remains stubborn, looking ready to fight to the bitter end. Zai doesn't actually want to destroy her, since he needs her to work at the factory, so he decides to seal her away for now. He plans to give her a proper orientation later, so he asks the thin man if he has anything on him that can hold an object. The scrawny man nods and pulls out a small packet. Zai takes it and freezes, realizing it is an unopened condom, which, to be honest, leaves him momentarily stunned. However, there is no time to overthink the absurdity, so he quickly opens it, holding the rim in his left hand while forming a sealing gesture with his right. He points toward the lunging Sadako and commands the spirits to be contained. A moment later, with a sharp cry, she is pulled into the small latex pouch. She transforms into a cloud of ghostly energy and is sealed tight. After a few brief words with the man, Zai takes his leave. We see him continue his stroll through the streets with the green-headed ghost, knowing the factory's many machines require a significant workforce to operate. He is determined to find as many spectral laborers as possible, but unfortunately, he doesn't encounter any more malevolent spirits causing trouble that night. In the end, he uses the promise of high salaries to recruit a few more female ghosts. By the time they return to the factory, it is already well past midnight. The weasel, the female zombie, and the fox immortal have also returned, though their haul was modest, having each captured only one wicked spirit. Zai realizes that this slow pace won't do if they are to meet their production quotas, so he gathers everyone to deliver new orders. He tells the zombie, the fox, and the weasel that they must start operating the machines themselves, leaving the recruitment of new staff entirely to him. He appoints the weasel as the acting manager in his absence, while the female zombie is tasked with transporting the finished garments using the carts. As for the fox immortal, he notes her elegant attire and puts her in charge of design, trusting her aesthetic sense to create the clothing styles. She is also tasked with cutting the fabric during her downtime. The three of them nod in agreement and immediately begin their new duties. Meanwhile, the green-headed ghost and the other new recruits begin learning how to operate the machinery from the thick-browed ghost and his crew. With over a dozen employees now working in the factory, finishing 100 pieces of clothing in a day or two seems perfectly manageable. Only then does Zai open the small packet to release Sadako, who immediately tries to attack him the moment she regains her form. But Zai's fists are far from soft, and after a brief physical intervention, Sadako becomes remarkably well-behaved and cooperative. She agrees to stay and work at the factory, and after a quick lesson from the thick-browed ghost, she masters the sewing machine with surprising speed. As she settles into her station and begins sewing rapidly, Zai watches the 4 production lines humming with activity and can't help but smile. But just as he is enjoying the rhythm of the factory, a sudden, sharp knocking sounds at the door, causing him to frown in suspicion. He wonders who could possibly be knocking at this hour, considering that nowadays, almost no one dares to venture out after dark. Zai steps forward to open the door and finds that his visitor isn't human at all, but a ghost, and a female one at that. The female ghost glares at him with a fierce expression and demands to know where the family living downstairs has gone. Zai simply invites her in, noting the wind is quite strong outside. The ghost pauses, momentarily stunned by his casual hospitality. She had planned to kill him, yet here he was inviting her inside, so she follows him into the factory only for him to shut the door behind her. When the ghost turns around, she sees that the door, the windows, and even the walls are covered in spiritual talismans. Furthermore, she finds over a dozen different monsters and spirits hard at work, leaving her completely unable to process the situation. Zai pulls out his watermelon knife and calmly asks what it was she wanted. Realizing the tables have turned, the ghost quickly reevaluates. She stammers that she was just looking for him, trying to come up with a believable excuse on the fly. She claims she wanted to slice some fruit for him, but realized she didn't have any, a very practical reaction to being outmatched. To be honest, she knows now that avenging the knocking ghost is impossible and that she has walked right into a trap. Realizing she is in grave danger, the ghost resigns herself to her fate and is forced to join the factory's assembly line. Over the next 2 days, the assembly line successfully produces over 100 short-sleeve shirts, finally meeting the quota from the livestream. Zai has the weasel and the female zombie handle the packaging, and once finished, he contacts a courier to ship all the clothes out. With this series of orders completed, he finally breathes a sigh of relief, as running a business is clearly no easy task. He decides to produce a new batch of clothes first and sell them via livestream later, so the factory spirits get back to work. Following the designs created by the Fox Immortal, they begin manufacturing 100 pieces each of several different styles for men and women. It takes a full 3 days to complete the task. That evening, Zai looks over the piles of finished garments with a satisfied smile. He instructs the loser ghost and the red-robed ghost to start the live stream tonight to sell this new inventory. While the others continue processing more fabric, the team divides the labor and begins another busy night of supernatural commerce. As the live stream begins, viewers start commenting on the staff, jokingly asking if that one employee is cosplaying as Sadako because the resemblance is simply uncanny. The audience is curious about what this humble factory has for sale today, with many mentioning they have already received their short-sleeved shirts from the last batch. One customer admits they initially thought 100 yuan was pricey, but the shirt feels incredibly cool. Others quickly chime in, sharing that exact same sentiment. They describe the fabric as icy cold, almost like carrying a portable air conditioner, and we see Zai watching as the praise floods the chat room. He can't help but smile, thinking to himself that clothes made by a group of ghosts would naturally feel a bit chilly, but then a discordant voice appears. A very hostile comment pops up, claiming the shirts are terrible and uncomfortable to wear, insisting that there is nothing good about them at all. The user calls the products trash, telling everyone to stop buying, and insulting the livestream's chaotic atmosphere, calling the whole display disgusting. This individual continues to spam the chat with malicious messages, acting as though they have a personal vendetta against both the clothes and the hosts. Zai frowns, wondering why someone would harbor such intense malice over a simple shirt, while the hanging female ghost, who is currently hosting, grows visibly angry. The red-robed ghost, acting as the model, is equally incensed, arguing that even if someone disliked the clothes, there is no need for such constant verbal abuse. Other viewers try to intervene, telling the heckler that there's no need for such negativity when the quality of the items is clearly perfectly fine. They dismiss the troll as a typical coward who acts tough online because his real life is likely miserable, which, to be honest, is a fair assessment of most internet bullies. The malicious man replies with even more arrogance, but another viewer warns him to be careful, suggesting that if the hosts were actual ghosts, he'd be the one crying. Zai immediately clicks on the man's profile to find his order history, discovering that he left a scathing, incredibly rude review on his previous purchase. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, he hands the man's delivery address to the plum vinegar ghost, telling him to pay a visit but to avoid taking a life. The plum vinegar ghost looks at the address and gives a sinister grin, assuring his boss that he knows exactly how to handle the situation. Zai nods and opens the door, reminding the ghost to return quickly since he is still a vital part of the factory's assembly line. The ghost nods in agreement and departs the factory immediately, transforming into a cloud of dark spectral energy as he flies off into the night. As he disappears, we can still hear him muttering about the sheer audacity of a human insulting clothes made by a ghost as talented as himself. He is determined to teach this critic a lesson he won't soon forget, proving that some reviews really do come with unexpected consequences. Back in the livestream, that same heckler is still spewing insults, but the hanging female ghost simply ignores him and continues the broadcast with a warm welcome. She announces that she has brought 2 new sets of outfits for men and women from the factory, noting there are only 100 pieces available for the quickest buyers. As she speaks, the red-robed ghost steps out wearing the new women's dress. Her figure is perfect, and the dress looks absolutely stunning on her. This immediately captures the interest of many women in the chat who begin placing orders, while the red-robed ghost prepares the next item. She brings out a new men's short-sleeved shirt, and following a somewhat vague and mumbled introduction from the hanging ghost, the viewers start buying those up too. Meanwhile, that persistent troll is still trying to make his presence felt with a barrage of insults, but then, quite suddenly, he stops typing altogether. The viewers notice the silence, jokingly wondering if his owner finally put him on a leash, as the atmosphere in the chat room lightens up considerably. While everyone is teasing the absent bully, both the men's and women's clothing lines sell out completely, prompting Zai to prepare to end the stream. But just then, the very user who had been hurling abuse suddenly reappears in the chat, stating that he wishes to make a formal statement. He writes that he solemnly apologizes to the host, the models, the factory workers, the boss, and everyone else watching the livestream. He retracts his previous comments, spamming the apology over and over again until the other viewers are left completely bewildered by the sudden change of heart. They wonder how such a rampant troll could lose his nerve so quickly and admit he was wrong. To be honest, it defies all internet logic. What they don't know, however, is that after this particular night, this man would never dare to enter another livestream ever again. He certainly wouldn't dream of insulting anyone online anymore, because he learned the hard way that malicious comments can have very real consequences. Imagine his shock when a literal vengeful spirit showed up at his front door, terrified him into submission, and forced him to log back on and apologize. Even more terrifying for him was the realization that he had become the very first person to know the truth about this factory. He knew the ghosts in Zai's factory were real, and from that day forward, the clothes sent out by the workshop almost never received a negative review. On the rare occasion a bad review did appear, it would mysteriously be edited into a glowing recommendation overnight, which is quite efficient in its own way. As we move into the following weeks, the factory officially enters full operation with over a dozen spectral employees working the floor. With 4 or 5 assembly lines running simultaneously through the night, they can easily produce hundreds of garments in a single shift. Producing hundreds of garments in a few days and selling them all in a single live stream. These ghosts are truly formidable workers. To be honest, Zai was starting to feel like the live streams were becoming too easy. These spirits had lost their edge. Instead of focusing on their former malicious intent, they were now obsessed with tailoring clothes and earning their wages. The next morning, Zai went to the factory and saw piles of finished clothes while the ghosts rested inside their boxes. Even though the windows and doors were sealed tight with thick black cloth, the ghosts stayed tucked away, needing their rest after a long night. He felt it was time to show his appreciation, considering these spirits had already earned him 60 or 70,000 yuan in just 10 days. As a boss, he knew he couldn't just make empty promises. He had to actually reward his spectral staff for their hard work. He told himself that since they had been so productive, a proper bonus was definitely in order. So, he took some cash and headed to the incense shop, where he encountered the same short-haired girl from before. The moment she saw him, she remarked how strange it was that he wasn't dead yet, which is quite the greeting, really. She was likely referring to his previous kidnapping by the yellow-haired ghost, but Zai just curled his lip and fired back. He pointed out that she sold ghost supplies every day and was still kicking, so why should he be any different? The girl just snorted and asked what he needed, to which he replied that he'd brought his car for a massive haul. He ordered over a dozen bundles of held bank notes, incense, candles, and even a large paper mansion to be burned as an offering. Surprisingly, all these items only cost him 1,000 yuan, meaning his profit margins remained incredibly high. Even after setting aside 3,000 each for the weasel, the fox spirit, and the female zombie, the rest of the payroll was pennies. He realized that hiring ghosts was a brilliant business move, though he wished his top 3 employees accepted ghost money too. As he loaded the car, the short-haired girl watched him with deep suspicion, wondering what on earth he was doing. He simply snapped that he was paying his employees' wages before driving off, leaving her standing there in confusion. But just as he finished unloading the supplies back at the factory, his phone suddenly began to ring. He picked it up to see Su Minjer calling again. With a slight frown, Zai answered and asked what she wanted this time. On the other end, Minjer sounded quite pitiful, but Zai simply sighed and told her to get straight to the point. Minjer made her request, and though he initially planned to refuse, he realized he was actually quite bored and eventually agreed. Minjer became instantly excited, announcing she'd drive over to pick him up before hanging up, and it wasn't long before she arrived. The roar of a sports car echoed outside, and when Zai opened the door, he found Minjer smiling as she told him it was time to go. As she pulled him toward the car, she explained that her father, having seen his skills, had been eager to invite him over. He wanted to equip their home with items to ward off evil spirits, and money was no object, an offer she presented with great anticipation. Zai remarked that it sounded simple enough, which delighted her so much she suggested they head to her house immediately. He told her to leave it to him, making Minjer incredibly happy. In her eyes, he was a hero, a well-deserved title, to be honest. A year ago, when a stranger harassed her, Zai had stepped in to give the man a beating despite them being total strangers. More recently, when she was kidnapped by 100 ghosts, he had thrashed them just the same. And really, what is a man like that? If not a hero in a woman's heart? The car soon reached the villa, and the two of them stepped out together. Minjer led him inside, where her father, Boss Su, was busy discussing business matters with several other merchants. He didn't pay much attention to his daughter's return at first, but the moment he saw Zai, he stood up abruptly with a start. Calling him Mr. Chun, the boss rushed forward, scolding Minjer for not giving him any warning that such a guest was arriving. He claimed Zai's presence brought light to his humble home, a level of politeness that caught our protagonist a bit off guard. Zai explained that Minjer was worried about spirits offending the household, so he came to set up some protections, an honor, the boss insisted. Boss Su immediately wrote out a check for 1 million yuan, handing it over as a small token of his deep respect. Before Zai could even offer a polite refusal, the boss stuffed the check into his pocket, leaving Zai to simply ask for a pen. A servant quickly brought a brush, and under the watchful eyes of the merchants, Zai walked toward the entrance of the villa. Boss Su turned to the merchants, boasting that they had no idea how incredible Mr. Chen truly was, having seen him catch ghosts with his bare hands. He asked them to guess what happened to the third ghost. Apparently, the poor spirit was so terrified it manifested just to kneel and beg for mercy. The ghosts even preferred being arrested by the police over facing Zai, a story that left the gathered businessmen utterly speechless with shock. They all expressed a desire to see what he would do for the villa, as Zai took the brush and approached a blank wall near the entrance. He wrote 8 bold characters, Zai the Bandit, home of a friend. Looking at those striking words on the white wall, one had to wonder. Everyone present stood there with their mouths hanging open. They had expected some profound, mystical ritual, but certainly not this. To be honest, Basu had just paid 1,000,000 yuan for 8 words. Minjer felt as though he had done something, yet also nothing at all. But in reality, both Minjer and her father knew very well that leaving these 8 words behind was actually a stroke of genius. Ever since the incident at the Dongshan mass grave, the reputation of Zai the Bandit had spread like wildfire through the spiritual circles of Haiqing. Essentially, every demon, ghost, and cultivator now knew there was a fierce bandit in town who was best left alone. He was considered dangerous and completely unpredictable, to the point where many ghosts would tremble just hearing the name, Zai the Bandit. Rumor had it that the recent wave of ghost kidnappings in Haiqing was entirely his doing, and the stories grew more terrifying by the day. It was said the number of ghosts he had sent to prison already exceeded 10. With such a fierce reputation, any ghost would be rightfully afraid. Naturally, no spirit would dare provoke anyone labeled as a friend of this bandit. Excellent. The calligraphy is good, but the content is better. Boss Su laughed heartily, declaring that with these 8 words, no ghost in Haiqing would ever dare set foot in his home again. The other merchants joined in with flattery, eyeing the boss with envy as Zai set the brush down with a calm expression. He remarked that, at the very least, ordinary spirits should show a bit of respect now. Modest. Mr. Chun is far too modest, the boss insisted. Since it was already afternoon, Boss Su invited him to stay for a meal, but Minjer quickly chimed in, saying she was taking him out instead. The boss was delighted. He felt it was a wonderful thing for his daughter to be so close to such a powerful cultivator. After we see Zai and Minjer leave the villa, she drove him straight to a bar, where the neon lights and music were already in full swing. The atmosphere inside was electric, with young men and women swaying their bodies, fueled by the alcohol coursing through their veins. They were releasing their pent-up passion, since no one dared go out at night anymore. Bars like this were naturally packed during the day. While Zai didn't mind the lively energy, he couldn't help but ask Minjer why she had brought him to such a place. He remained silent for a moment, scanning the room to find the air thick with energy, mingled with other unsettling scents. We see him sense something unusual, a presence of blood and fragments, as Minjer grabbed 2 drinks, and he took a cautious sip. He remarked that people likely died here every day, a comment that startled Minjer just as a girl of about 16 appeared. She suddenly stood up from behind the bar, as I noted that while her voice was gentle, it carried a sharp, chilling edge. There was a hint of killing intent in her tone as she laughed, looking cute, yet somehow radiating an inexplicable sense of gloom. As the girl questioned them, Zai subtly pulled Minjer behind him, calmly raising his glass to his lips. He noted that with a blood fragment, like her in the bar, it was only natural for people to die daily, a statement that hit its mark. The girl in the red robe stared with wide eyes as Zai added that who he was didn't matter. What mattered was that she wasn't human. A slightly twisted smile played on his lips, one so unsettling that even the red-robed girl felt a sudden, instinctive shiver of fear. Her cute demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by a grim expression as she spoke, but Zai told her she was overthinking things. He pointed out that the last person who tried to cross him was currently sitting in a prison cell, which only fueled the girl's rage. She pulled out a stack of red paper and a pair of scissors, quickly snipping away until she had created a string of delicate paper dolls. Declaring that no one dared provoke Yuchalaw, she moved her hands together, pressing her fingers into a mystical seal. Red malevolent energy began to swirl around her hands, and suddenly, that string of paper dolls seemed to twitch with unnatural life. They took flight, swirling through the air while emitting eerie, high-pitched sounds that echoed through the bar. As the little paper ghosts flew toward him, Zai calmly drew his watermelon knife from his waist and delivered a single, horizontal slash. The entire string of paper dolls was sliced clean through, fluttering harmlessly to the floor as a look of genuine, pleasant surprise crossed Zai's face. Looking down at the string of delicate paper dolls on the floor, Zai looked at Yuchalaw and remarked that he hadn't expected her to be such a skilled artisan. He noted she was quite handy with scissors and jokingly suggested his factory needed talent like hers. Naturally, this only made Yuchalaw angrier. Yet, she also realized that Zai was no ordinary opponent, stepping back slightly as she kept her eyes fixed intently on him. She admitted he had some skill, but warned that his luck had run out today before once again forming a mystical seal with her hands. The paper dolls on the ground took flight once more, glowing with a faint red light as they charged. Zai simply gave a cold snort. Channeling his inner energy, his watermelon knife began to emit a soft radiance as he let out a sharp shout, commanding the spell to break. He swung the blade at the string of paper dolls again, but this time, they weren't merely sliced in two by the impact. Instead, they exploded into fragments upon contact, the entire string bursting into a shower of paper scraps that scattered across the floor. Yuchalaw recoiled in shock, but Zai didn't give her a moment to breathe, lunging forward and leaping onto the bar counter. From his high vantage point, he brought the knife down in a fierce strike. Yuchalaw scrambled backward, desperately forming another seal. She unleashed a bolt of red malevolent energy to intercept him, but Zai remained fearless, putting all his strength into the downward slash. With a resounding metallic ring, he shattered the dark energy. Yuchilua, stunned by his sheer ferocity, could do nothing but continue her retreat. She realized her paper dolls and occult arts were completely unable to stop him, mostly because her attacks were far too flashy and complex. Zai, on the other hand, used brute force to overcome her magic, relying on pure energy and his blade without any need for fancy techniques. Sometimes, when facing such a direct approach, elaborate tricks really do become redundant. We see him kick off and chase her through the bar. As they wove through the chaotic crowd, Yuchilua glanced back and snorted, a sinister red light flashing within her eyes. She attempted to seize control of his soul, a specialty of hers, though it usually required the target to have a somewhat fragile spirit. If she encountered someone with an unshakable will, control became nearly impossible, and as it happened, Zai was exactly that kind of man. At that moment, he held only one firm conviction. He was going to get Yuchilua into his factory to work as a master tailor. To him, it would be a tragic waste not to have her operating the machinery, and so, fueled by this absurdly iron will, he remained unaffected. Yuchilua soon discovered that she couldn't control his soul at all. Instead, the time she wasted trying only allowed him to catch up to her. As he swung the watermelon knife, she let out a terrified scream for him to stop, causing the blade to halt abruptly right above her head. He asked if she had reconsidered joining his factory, noting that while he wasn't letting his guard down, they could talk since they had no real grudge. She snapped back, asking what he meant by no grudge when he had just tried to kill her. He responded by letting the blade drop, sending her scrambling back. The knife whistled past her face, leaving her pale with fright. She cursed under her breath and immediately turned to make another run for it. But he had no intention of giving her another chance, stepping forward and instantly landing a strike across Yuchilua's back with the blade. She fell to the ground with a cry of pain, turning back to look at him while a faint, blood-red aura began to emanate from her body. She begged him to stop and promised to go back with him. He gave a cold snort and asked if she was absolutely sure about that decision. Having no other choice, Yuchilua confirmed she was sure. He sheathed his knife, remarking that she was finally showing some sense after being injured. For the moment, she only wanted to play along to avoid further conflict, while he was simply focused on tricking her into reaching the factory. The two of them shared a tense smile, but he suddenly frowned, asking what she was laughing at and telling her to get up and move. She huffed and climbed to her feet, agreeing to follow him. In her mind, she had already decided to go along for now and wait for an opening. She planned to kill him and drain his essence if the opportunity arose, or, if he proved too powerful to defeat, she would simply find a way to escape. We returned to the bar counter, where Su Man'er felt an immediate sense of relief seeing that he was completely unharmed. She glanced at Yuchilua, finding it hard to believe that this beautiful, innocent-looking girl was actually a dangerous occult practitioner. He told Su Man'er that since the drinks were finished, she should head home while he took the girl back to his factory. Before she could respond, he added a quick reminder for her to be more careful in the future. He warned her to avoid chaotic places where these types of twisted individuals might be lurking, casting a pointed look at Yuchilua as he spoke. Yuchilua simply pouted without offering a rebuttal, and Su Man'er nodded in agreement, suggesting they all head out together. And so, he led Su Man'er and Yuchilua out of the bar. The moment they stepped into the bright sunlight, Yuchilua's face turned even paler. Already injured, Yuchilua felt her weakness growing. As an occult practitioner with an immortal soul, she was far from ordinary. In theory, she was more sinister than most, and while she could appear in broad daylight, the harsh sun caused her significant discomfort. Seeing her distress, he simply ignored it, while Su Man'er kindly asked if she could give them a ride. He nodded, and after they climbed in, Su Man'er dropped them off outside his home before driving away into the distance. He then told Yuchilua to head upstairs. She complied obediently, though deep down, she was already plotting his death or her escape. Once inside, he pointed toward a cutting machine and remarked that since she was so skilled at cutting paper dolls, she could surely handle fabric. He asked if she knew how to tailor clothes, assuming her peculiar talents might finally be put to some practical use. She took a deep breath, thinking to herself how beneath her this was, while he patiently began teaching her how to operate the machine. Yuchilua didn't pay the slightest bit of attention, and after a while, he noted that it was getting dark and time for his dinner. He told her to wait there until his shift started, then turned and left, leaving her alone in the workshop. The moment he was gone, she let out a cold sneer, calling him a fool for thinking she would actually work for him. She reached out to open the door to make her escape, only to realize as she drew closer that it was covered in spiritual talismans. The barrier sent her flying backward onto the floor. She scrambled up, her expression turning grim as she stared at the seals on the door. Next, she turned her sights toward the window and lunged at it, hoping to smash through the glass and fly away to freedom. A series of sharp cracks echoed as the window's hidden seals triggered, violently repelling her and adding to her growing list of injuries. She cried out in pain and took a long moment to crawl back up, limping over to pull back the black cloth covering the window frame. Finding even more talismans there, she cursed his sanity, wondering why anyone would go to such lengths just to block a window. She felt utterly wasted in such a place, but as she looked at the fabric waiting to be cut into garments, her professional instincts stirred. Examining the rough outlines, she felt a surge of disdain, thinking the current tailoring was absolute garbage. To her horror, she felt a genuine impulse to fix the cuts herself. After all, she did have a natural talent for this sort of thing. She tried to shake the thought, telling herself it was impossible for a powerful, immortal occult practitioner like her to even consider such a thing. The idea of working in a factory tailoring clothes for him was utterly laughable, so she quickly averted her gaze from the fabric. She was terrified she might actually give in to the impulse, but time was running out as the sun began to set, and that man's return grew imminent. She knew she had to escape by any means necessary, and the more Yuchilwa thought about it, the more desperate she became. We see her pacing the factory frantically, searching for an exit, only to find spiritual talismans hidden behind every black cloth she uncovered. Her movements became hurried and almost manic as her anxiety peaked. Then, just as she reached her breaking point, darkness finally fell. A dozen ghosts slowly emerged from the wooden crates. The female zombie hopped out of her cabinet, and the main door finally creaked open. The fox spirit and the weasel entered and shut the door behind them, prompting a stunned Yuchilwa to rush forward and confront them. She demanded to know how they could open a door covered in talismans, to which the fox spirit simply replied that they followed the immortal path. She explained that as long as they didn't directly clash with the seals, the charms wouldn't harm her or her companion, Brother Huang. Yuchilwa's expression darkened. Her cultivation was rooted in the dark arts, meaning the talismans would attack her if she even drew near. She pointed at the fox spirit and ordered her to open the door, but the girl just scoffed, telling her she was dreaming. The fox spirit told her to settle in and work, but Yuchilwa warned her not to assume her status as a spirit would protect her from a fight. The vinegar plum ghost challenged her to try it as she and a dozen other spirits stepped forward to back the fox spirit up. Even the female zombie hopped over to join the circle surrounding her. Yuchilwa wasn't afraid of any of them individually, but a mob was a different story. She retreated slightly and fell silent, realizing that none of these spirits were easy targets and she couldn't afford a losing battle. The spirits told her that being allowed to work here was an opportunity, and if she delayed their production quotas, they would all jump her. Yuchilwa took a deep breath and reluctantly agreed. Finally walking over to the cutting machine, he had shown her to begin her shift.